This is iFanboy 2023 All Media Year-End Roundup, brought to you by iFanboy listeners just like you. Hello, welcome to iFanboy 2023 All Media Year-End Roundup. My name is Conor Kilpatrick, and I am here, at least in spirit, with Josh Flanagan.
I'm here, baby. I'm sitting in the seat. Let's roll.
And Ron Richards.
I'm here as well, too.
You're the only healthy one.
I just ran 3 miles this morning. Let's do it. Come on.
Good for you.
I'm ready.
Good for you. And we are iFanboy. We're the 3 original iFanboys. And we like comic books, but we also like a lot of other things. And every year since we've been doing this show, we've been ending the year with an all media and roundup. We've been doing it since 2006.
Jeez. I don't want to dwell on that.
We're going to talk about some of the movies and TV shows and music and books and comics and also podcasts that we enjoyed this year in 2023. You know, media is still strange since the pandemic, still figuring itself out, but we push on and enjoy what we can. And before we get to the show, quick reminder and a warning. We don't tend to spoil things on this show. It's more like a high level of things we enjoyed, but it's always possible. So if there's something you see on the show list that you're really sensitive about, I would just skip it.
Yeah, I mean, this is a conversation post of things we watched and enjoyed, and we're going to talk about why. So if you haven't seen them, there's a chance that we might spoil something for you.
Generally on this show, but
yeah,
you never know.
Fair warning.
Connor, how strict are you in your spoilerage at this point? I mean, for a while, you weren't watching trailers.
Now that I can go to theaters beyond AMC, I'm back. I try not to watch any trailers, yeah. Of big blockbuster films, you guys keep forgetting this. It's only the big blockbusters. I watch indie trailers all the time because I don't know anything about those movies.
Fair.
It's just the films I know I'm going to see anyway.
Well, anyway, my hope is that if you, the listener, have not seen any of these movies or TV or anything else we're going to discuss on the podcast, maybe this incites you to go check it out. That's the hope.
Yes, that's the hope.
The whole purpose of this discussion is to celebrate the things we enjoyed this year.
And so we're going to start as we always do with films. And our standard film disclaimer is that we are recording this the very first week of December. You're not going to hear it till the middle of December. There's several films, big films that haven't come out yet. You're not going to hear us talk about, like Ferrari or Maestro, American Fiction.
Poor Things just came out in theaters, right. Yeah. So yeah,
there's a couple you may not hear us talk about. It's only
he said Ferrari, and then you started to say Portha. I thought I was like, "Are you mispronouncing Porsche?"
No,
Ferrari, Portha.
Ferrari Portha is the new model. So if there's a movie from December we haven't talked about, it's probably because we haven't seen it yet. Because that's just how it goes. So let's start with the biggest film of the year and Josh Flanagan.
There are a lot of surprises here. Is that one, a movie called Barbie would be the biggest film of the year, and then two, that I could make a strong case that it was my favorite movie I saw this year.
Sure.
I did not know a single thing about it other than it was Margot Robbie, who is deceptively talented while also being just unearthly beautiful. And I thought, that's interesting. And then also you were talking about Greta Gerwig, who is a auteur director. And like I said, I had no idea it was going to be. And what I didn't really expect was that I would find it as deeply funny as I did. Mm-hmm. The entire way through. There's specifically, I'm sure a lot of nerds will talk about it, but there's a bit where they're talking about how men will sit there and tell you everything about The Godfather. And you're sitting there watching that with your wife and you're me. She's like, well, they nailed you, a bunch of stuff like that. And it was delightful. Like the entire thing. I didn't see it at the same time as Oppenheimer. I saw it several weeks later, and it was more a case of like, well, we got to go see something. I don't know. I wrote it off because of my latent sexism. I don't know. And because of that, I just didn't expect anything of it. And my wife and I both left, and just like, because of the surprise, but also just because it was incredibly well done and really well written. And I was like, man, how did this become a really huge movie when it's clearly straddling the line of the American social divide?
What's interesting to me of you enjoying it so much, and just disclaimer, I still have not seen it yet.
Oh, wow.
Because I'm caught in this trap where I feel like it'd be weird for me to watch it without my wife, but she has shown no interest in watching it.
That's so strange.
At this point, yeah.
I think that she might be like me in that she doesn't know anything about it or know what to expect, and on the very surface level. But I'm telling you, I think she will very much enjoy it.
Yeah, I do too. But that said, from what I've heard, I know what happens. I've heard all the things. I know about the Godfather thing, blah, blah, blah. I mean, this seems like a movie I would like.
Yes.
In terms of the meta, like all this stuff. Like,
there's nothing you wouldn't like about it.
But Josh, I'm surprised. But normally you roll your eyes at that stuff. So it must have been really good. I'm surprised that you enjoyed it as much as you did.
I know what you're saying, but when stuff is done, basically, if things are metatextual and reference other things as a crutch, as that being material instead of thinking of something original to say, that's the case. But, there is a way to comment on society and, gender roles and blah, 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 and all that stuff in a way that works well. If you're smart and you do it well, then it works. If it's hacky, It isn't. This is way different now, but there was a time when Kevin Williamson or Kevin Smith or any other Kevin got by being like, they talked about Star Wars in the movie. Right. And then 1,000 people tried to do that and call that art, and it wasn't. It was just like,
that isn't this.
No, is what I'm saying.
That is not what this is at all. Yeah, it is metatextual, but not in that way. And also, Ron is written by Noah Baumbach, who you love.
Yeah, love hate, but yes,
but you love his films.
I like his work.
Yeah.
But this was actually fun, unlike the other Noah Baumbach movies I've seen.
Greta Gerwig is, like Josh said, is a legitimate auteur. I've loved all of her films,
and she's now going to be like, she can now write her own check for.
She's doing Narnia next.
Yeah.
Jeez. Wow. She gets sucked into the IP vortex.
Yeah. They're starting over, I assume.
Paycheck.
This is the most fun I had at a movie.
Uh-huh.
I'm looking at our list. Several of these movies I saw with packed houses, but this was the one where I thought the roof was going to come off the place. I mean, that's how much fun it was, and how much fun it was on opening weekend when the packed house full. That was 90% women.
I know, Connor, you meticulously crafted the rundown here, but I feel like with the next movie that should be discussed is Oppenheimer, because it's hard not to talk about Barbie without in the same breath as Oppenheimer, because really what you had this summer was something that we haven't seen for a very long time, which was a completely born of the audience phenomenon of interest in two movies that couldn't be more different.
Any more thoughts on Barbie? Other than it's terrific and everyone should see it. It's very, very, very funny.
Yeah.
We will probably watch it through the holidays as we have more downtime.
I feel bad saying this. Ryan Gosling steals the show as Ken.
I'm not surprised by saying that at all. I'm a huge
you
Gosling
feel bad
fan.
saying in a movie about Barbie, but she's great in it, but she's basically the straight person, whereas he gets to be the comedic person and he steals it. Anyway.
Yeah. It's a great movie.
So I was the only one who went to Barbenheimer, which was the opening weekend of Barbie and Oppenheimer, seeing them both on the same day with a lunch break in the middle. And I have not been in a theater like that since the pandemic, where there was hundreds of people in the theater.
And energy.
Yeah.
The theater was overwhelmed because, they're all on like short staffs, for obvious reasons. And so we went early morning for Oppenheimer, saw it like 10 a.m. lunch, and then came back for Barbie. And they didn't have enough takers just to take the tickets. The line was out the door down the street to get into the theater, and people were pissed because the movies are going to start, and the woman in front of me was like, well, didn't they anticipate this? Like, everyone knew this was happening. And so it just was interesting to be in the theater again, when it felt like the old days of like a Jim Carrey movie opening in the 90s where it was like Bedlam or whatever, that kind of thing. It felt nice to be there, even if it was just one more time again.
I think there's a lot to be said for the phenomenon of like...
It's a TikTok phenomenon.
It is a bummer that like a week later, the strike, the actor strike hit, right? And like pretty much, blew any momentum that it had. But there was this, there was a strong wave in the early summer of, movies are back post-pandemic. And, because we have been advocating going to see movies in the theater as much as possible, because you don't get that experience at home.
Yeah, Barbie was a great film, but the experience of seeing Barbie in a packed house full of women who were going berserk at every crushing feminist line was, you can't replicate that at all, no matter how good your theater system is.
The little girls, and they'd come dressed up, and I just thought, wow. And they're super excited. Pink. And I thought it's really interesting that they can come in here and get usually stuff that gets marketed to little kids, princesses, and it's not the deepest thing or whatever. And like, oh, this is a really good film that they're going to take something out of.
They own that bit of it. Like they take that pinkness. Like pink was the color of the day, right? Everyone in the theater was wearing pink.
It was just nice.
My favorite part was after the movie was over, all the women were calling each other Barbie, because that's something that happens in the film. And they were just sort of doing it organically. It was just a really great moment in the theater itself. And what was really fun was, people going to Oppenheimer who probably wouldn't necessarily normally go to Oppenheimer because they were doing the whole thing. And there was lots of bewildered people stumbling out of that theater after 3 hours.
Well, so let's talk about Oppenheimer then. So, Josh, you had Oppenheimer on your list. What were the earmarks of Oppenheimer being a good movie experience for you?
So, Oppenheimer, is one of those movies where
we were super excited for it. We were all
super excited. It's period historical storytelling about something that's really important by someone who's probably the auteur director of the time. And I've said that twice, sounding like a snob, but
we have probably 4 auteur directors. No, 5. I mean, we have a lot.
But we're in a world where, not to go after Scorsese, we'll talk about him. And, but like, there's a lot of superhero movies that are a big deal. So when you see somebody who's going to make an adult movie, not that kind, who has a budget and sort of carte blanche to make their thing, and, they have a good track record, it's exciting. And I know by now, I saw Tenet like at home, and it was fine or whatever, but I thought, that would have been quite a bit more amazing in the theater. And so I was not going to miss the chance to see Oppenheimer in the theater. And, we talked about it already, but 100% delivered for me. I just went, that's a movie, and that was the real feeling, was like, oh, that's a film. That's what we talk about. And that seems so much more rare. How long was that movie? Was it super long?
3 hours.
It wasn't Killers of the Didn't feel like it. It was exactly what I wanted. And, Barbie was a different theater going experience altogether. But in terms of like seeing something that makes you think, about all these moral ambiguities and history, I mean, like everything that happens in that is a very big deal. And then at the same time, it brings it down to a really personal level where you kind of don't know what to think about Oppenheimer during quite a bit of it. And then also, sort of just incredible visual language and imagery that, and if you're a certain kind of nerd, that Christopher Nolan does practical effects whenever possible. So when you're watching it, you're not seeing CGI. And, and maybe I'm old enough or, that like that really means something to me, is that like you're watching people make movies the way that they used to. And so there's a deliberateness to it that I really appreciate.
Yeah, he actually dropped the bomb in the desert.
Just for a second, I went, did he? Like, I'd almost believe it. I thought it was delightful, but not in a way that made you feel good. I don't know
Delightful.
It made me feel good in all the ways that a great movie is supposed to. I will probably never watch it again.
Interesting.
It was exhausting.
I loved it. I thought, I'm still struggling to pick out my top 5 of the year, at least to put them in order.
Mhm.
And this is,
Yeah.
Barbie, Oppenheimer, the next 2 films we're going to talk about, they're all in that list. But
Yep.
I love this movie. Like you, Josh, I didn't feel the length at all. The performances were amazing. Cillian Murphy was out of this world. It's one of those Nolan casts where everyone's in it, and they're all terrific. It felt like every Best Actor winner of the last couple of years was in the movie, even in tiny cameos.
Even David Krumholtz, who should win a Best Actor just because.
Robert Downey Jr. might win an Oscar. You nailed it. It's one of those movies they just don't make anymore unless it's Nolan or someone like him.
Yeah.
And how many more of those do we have left?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I'm going to go to every one until they stop.
Yeah, exactly.
It was amazing. I loved it.
Yeah, it was definitely an experience. It was one
It needed
that,
that sound.
Again, going back to theater versus watching from home, and that was the thing, was that Barbie and Oppenheimer came out in July, very busy time, for me personally, like couldn't get I had to choose Barbie or Oppenheimer, and I chose Oppenheimer, and I'm glad I did, because seeing it in the theater with that rumbling sound and also with the quiet, and like the dramatic moments, and seeing it in a theater of people, like it was just like no other experience.
And I think that's correct.
It was masterful filmmaking, for sure.
If you had to pick a movie to see in the theater, if you could only see one, that's the one.
Yeah.
Now, what's interesting is, it also made $1 billion, but it obviously was goosed by the Barbenheimer phenomenon.
Sure.
There's no way to ever know, but, his last Tenet did pretty okay in the pandemic. Dunkirk made over $300 million. Like, all of his last movies have made a lot of money at the theater. People tend to go to movies because he's directing them for whatever miracle reason it's happened to. And we'll never know. I'm always curious what this one would have done without that phenomenon, but it is what it is.
I wonder what it would have done if he'd never done Batman.
Nothing.
That's what kind of got him in the public zeitgeist.
Yeah, he would have been a Memento guy.
Right.
He would have made small little films.
Well, I think it would have done well, but I don't think it would. I think the shot in the arm with the phenomenon definitely helped it.
It kept going, though. Like that, it
did.
went beyond that weekend. It kept making money.
It had legs.
Anyway, I just loved it. I was so happy to see it.
Yeah.
It was a good year for theater going.
It was a good year for theater going. It was also a good year for very, very long movies, because the first movie on my list, of course, was Killers of the Flower Moon from Martin Scorsese, and, starring Robert De Niro and Leonardo DiCaprio, and I forget the woman's name. But this was hotly anticipated film from Scorsese, Lily Gladstone. That's what it was. Sorry, Lily Gladstone.
In the Oscar most likely winning role.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. $200 million plus budget. Scorsese's first movie with Apple TV as a producer partner, and he's post Netflix. He's just going from tech company to tech company now.
Whatever it takes.
The money. Yeah, exactly. And I feel like the narrative from this film going into it was the length. It was like, oh my God, it's 3.5 hours or whatever, however long it is. What was it? 3 hours, 24 minutes or something like that.
Something nuts like that. Yeah.
It was just gripping and enthralling, and a story of American history that is not widely known or told, that is fascinating, and tapping into everything there is about America in the early 1900s, and that, kind of transition, and going all the way back to the founding of North America in the 1600s. And, it taps into so much, and it's just beautifully shot, beautifully done, masterful.
There are still shots from the film I think about. He does some really beautiful work in this. It's not like, and we did a whole review show on this, but, he's known as the guy who created that. He didn't create it, but really took the reins on that MTV style. That's horrible to say, but the fast cutting, the fast editing, the fast paced. And this is the opposite of that. He lingers. And that his last film, The Irishman, was like that too. But there's some lingering slow-mo in this movie. The dancing when you discover oil, and the fire through the petalled glass window. He's still got it.
Yep.
It's a term that people use a lot. Self-indulgent or whatever. But like when you've earned it and you're Martin Scorsese and you're like, I want to sit on this shot for a really long time. Great. I trust you. This
he's
is
making
you've
art.
Earned it.
Like,
yes.
He's 80 years old.
It's still
Is he
pop
80?
art to a certain extent, which
No,
is
but he's still making art. It's
right,
still
but
art.
which isn't a
let
bad
the man
thing.
make his art.
But it just happens to me that his art, is very entertaining, and he
Yeah.
gets away with it in that way. And it's not entertaining like, talking down to it or sort of giving the people the red meat they want or whatever. It's just that, his sensibilities, I think, lend themselves to films that are thoughtful and beautiful, but also, are entertaining.
It is entertaining, but it's also horribly depressing and sad, a movie.
Sure.
Oh yeah, it was heartbreaking. Like that's the one thing we talked about in the review podcast was like the amount of the repetition of death in this movie was just like it was overwhelming until I hit the epiphany of like, right, he's using that as a tactic in telling the story, and it became that much more valuable, that much more.
You have to feel the oppressive nature of the
exactly.
murders.
Yeah.
Actually, thinking about it now, that was the first weekend I was really sick. So the sickness I'm in now started with Killers of the Flower Moon.
It probably made you sad. But by the way, maybe entertaining is the wrong word for lack of a better one.
It was
but
entertaining, but it's also sad.
compelling. I don't know.
Yeah, compelling's the right word.
It wasn't difficult. But it wasn't difficult. Does that make sense?
What was interesting is I got cocky and I brought in food, but from the concession stand. For 3-hour movies, I normally don't. And for Scorsese 3.5-hour movies, like I didn't eat or drink during The Irishman at all. But I was like, fuck it. I had a soda, I had candy. I didn't feel it. I didn't feel like the movie was long. I didn't have to go to the bathroom. I was locked in on the film.
Yeah.
I never for 1 second looked at my watch. It was entirely compelling, very un-Leo-like performance. He plays a kind of a dumb...
Yeah, a screw up.
And he's got prosthetics on to make him look like he's just not the leading man type. And it was interesting.
Yeah.
I think they were all really good. It was a really great... he's so good.
It's so good. Yeah, and to the point that you said earlier, Connor, is like this was a good year for movies and hard to nail down one, but this is definitely rising to the top of the list in terms of one of the best.
These first 3 are in my top 5 for sure. I would also put The Holdovers in my top 5.
I would agree.
The latest film from Alexander Payne.
This I haven't seen and very much want to.
I'm not going to spoil it.
I know
I literally watched it last night knowing we were recording and I wanted to talk about it.
Paul Giamatti may get an Oscar nomination for this, and if he does, he will 100% deserve it. Payne doesn't make a lot of films. I think he's only made one bad one. I've loved the other ones.
Is that the Downsizing?
Yeah, Downsizing.
Yeah.
The rest, I think, were terrific.
Bad is relative in that context, too.
I just didn't like the movie at all, but that's fine. This is maybe his best one.
Really?
Which is hard to say considering election and
this is really good.
I have never seen a trailer that instantly told me what they were trying to do and that the thing that they were trying to do was exactly what I wanted to see.
And the trailer alone, I agree with you, it was one of the highlights of going to the movies this year, seeing that trailer in a theater.
I was like, this is the 70s?
Normally what you see is the people who make the trailers are not related to the film usually at all, right? And might not be in this case or whatever, but and without spoiling it or giving it away, Josh, there is a through line from the trailer to the movie, which I cannot wait for you to watch and see it. Yeah,
no, I thought like it visually instantly told me what it was in a way that just delighted me.
Takes place in the 70s. It's shot post-production. They make it look like it's the 70s, the grain of the film and the aspect ratio.
Yep.
Takes place at a rich, exclusive boarding school. I think it's in New Hampshire. Over the Christmas
Exeter
break.
Academy?
It's a school like that.
Right.
Where some of the students have to stay behind for various reasons. So one of the faculty has to stay with them, and it's Paul Giamatti's character, as well as the cook for the school, who's played by the actress who plays the cop on Only Murders in the Building.
Yep.
And it just turns into this little found family story about the holidays and these characters and their lives. And it's a long movie. I think it's over 2 hours.
It was like 2:15 or so. Yeah, I remember checking it. But it never drags.
No, but it doesn't feel like it. But which really allows them to dig deep into the characters and the situation. Yeah. And Paul Giamatti is just wonderful.
So good.
It's no surprise. I'm not breaking any new ground telling people this, but he really comes alive in this role. He indulges in every line reading in this. Yeah. He really digs into this character, and I saw him do an interview about it. He loved playing this character. You
see it in the trailer, Josh, so this is a spoiler, but like he gets sense that he's the teacher that nobody wants to get, right? That nobody likes and that sort of thing. And as the movie develops, you there's a sympathy that is developed not only for him, but for the kid who I think is a junior or senior, like he's stuck in junior year, but I think he's older than that because he's a troubled kid. The kid and the chef.
Wait, you're telling me that over the course of they bond in a relationship and we find out they're all more than we thought they were?
Exactly.
That is a crazy concept. Are you kidding me?
It's also...
I haven't seen that since Dutch.
But
it's so hilariously funny, and it's at times really sad and heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And I just think Payne's another auteur in a row, but he's one of our best filmmakers, even if he doesn't work all that often. So when he does make a film, it's an event for me. I went by myself on like a Friday afternoon.
Yeah.
There were more people in the theater with me to see the Holdovers than the next day in the same theater to see the Marvels.
Well, it's no surprise.
It's LA.
It was me and a bunch of much older people, and we all really appreciated and loved the movie. I was with my people. It was great.
Yeah. Such a good movie.
If you haven't seen it, it's still in theaters. It takes place during Christmas. It's kind of a holiday movie.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I wanted to be like, is this an entry in the movie that takes place during Christmas movie category? Right? Because it's not about Christmas, but it takes place during
Christmas.
But the holidays are omnipresent, and there's a Christmas party and that sort of thing. Yeah.
If you change the holiday, does it still work? If you make it Thanksgiving break, you make it Easter break or whatever, spring break. It still works.
I think it does. I don't know if you have the emotional resonance of
not
kind of. I mean, I don't know if a kid would be as
Christmas.
devastated about being stuck at school over Christmas break as he would over like Easter break. But
also, bravo for Tate Donovan showing up at the end.
Everyone who's in it is really good.
So
it's
good.
Really,
so
and
good.
it's full of. There's a Wahlberg in it, like as a guy in a bar. Like it's very New England 70s awesomeness. It's really, really good. Everyone needs to see it.
Yep. Agreed.
When I first saw the trailer, I thought that it might be a new Tom McCarthy movie. And then as we went through it, I literally was like, this is Alexander Payne. Like you just know, because there's not so many people who could do it. Yep. It's great.
Well, talking about auteurs, I was very excited when David Fincher's film The Killer came out, and big Fincher fan, despite not watching the majority of what he's done while on Netflix over these past, whatever.
He's been
many
very
years.
into serial killers.
Yeah, very. I didn't watch Mindhunter. I didn't watch any of that.
Mindhunter's
Obviously,
great.
It was good.
I've heard that, but I haven't gotten into it.
You got to like serial killing, though.
Fantastic. Charlie Manson.
We talked about Mank, I feel like, on the show a couple of years ago. I enjoyed that. But so The Killer was interesting, and it had me for a couple of reasons. One is that, the fact that it was based on a graphic novel that I've read and enjoyed that Archaea put out.
Right.
Did the U.S. distribution right when Archaea started. And then also that it had Fassbender, who I'm a huge Fassbender fan. So I was already, Fincher, Fassbender, based on a graphic novel. I was already there. But as the movie's coming out and they start revealing the fact that they use like 24 Smith songs in the movie, I was like, oh, well then.
I did. I was waiting to talk with you about that here. Is that at first it was like, oh, he's listening to it. And I was like, oh, that's all he listens to. And I just want to know what that's about.
And kudos to Trent Reznor because he's the one who convinced Fincher to do it. But The Killer is similar to the Holdovers in spirit, not in execution. But reminded me of 70s genre revenge film.
Yeah, that's true.
But done with a contemporary kind of approach and mindset and much more contemporary, the usage of brand logos and things like that. But it was such a methodological. The film was broken up into chapters, so you had a clear step of what was happening. Methodical, I'm sorry. Clear step of what was happening at each point as the revenge plot continues. Like the first 20 minutes are gripping and nothing happens.
I thought it was one of the best 20 minutes of any movie I saw.
So good.
The opening 20 minutes had me on the edge of my seat.
You get introduced to the character and understand what makes him tick, what his role as an assassin is, how he does it. It starts building up this idea that you are, seeing this, seasoned pro doing what he does best. And the rest of the movie goes from there. I thought it was such a great setup, and the action and the pace and just everything was just like, it hit so many notes for me throughout the entire thing. It was just such a delight. Another one that I, was only in theaters for a couple of weeks. I scrambled to go see it in the theater because I did want to have that experience. And I was glad I did. To hear the music very loudly, but also I loved what Fincher did with the music where like you didn't hear it plainly, right? It was diegetic.
Yes. Oh, thank you for using that word. Brilliant.
When he had his headphones in, you heard it muffled because it was inside his head, except when you saw his POV, it was crystal clear and loud because of what he was hearing. Mm-hmm. It was so done masterfully. Can't recommend it anymore. I really, really love this movie.
I know there's probably film geeks at home who are tearing their hair out. They'll keep calling everyone an auteur, but I'm also going to call John Carney an auteur as well.
He is.
And he had his latest film come out. It came out on Apple, but I also saw it in the theater. Flora and Son, I think is his fourth film about music.
That's about right, yeah.
I love this movie. I didn't love his last one, Sing Street. I thought it was okay. I didn't love it, but this one felt like a return closer to the tone of Once, perhaps a little sillier, but I felt more like in that vein. It takes place in Dublin, stars Eve Hewson, who is Bono's daughter. I mean, this movie made me cry. This movie had music that I thought was really catchy. It had some incredible scenes I still think about. Now, I think he just does these wonderful little miracle movies about life and love and music, and he never ends the movie in a Hollywood fashion.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess it's kind of a spoiler, but in none of his movies do the central characters come together in a romantic way. And another director in another world, they would.
That is a spoiler, I guess, in a way, but it's very apparent in Once and Begin Again that that's the way that they go with it, and I love that. I remember watching Begin Again. We watched it recently, and it was the same thing. Like at the end,
I love that movie.
There was never really a moment where it was romantic, and it was like any other.
No, there was
movie.
one moment when they come out of the train and they look at each other, and there's a long pause, and then in their heads they're deciding if they're going to go that way, and they don't.
Right,
and that's the one moment.
But it's not even that it is romantic; it's that they think about it because I don't know, maybe it's like a postmodern thing where like they realize they're in a movie or we do and we're watching it while they make that decision. But then by having them not do that, they make it clear that that's not what this is about.
Right.
I haven't seen the movie, but I bet I would be like, oh, they shouldn't end up together. And I bet they don't because I trust this filmmaker.
It's wonderful. It really is. I love big Barbie, big Oppenheimer, big Killers of the Flower Moon, big superhero movies, but I also love going to the theater for the Holdovers, for Flora and Son, for the next movie I'm going to talk about.
There's the whole quiet small film category, which, the small indie, no explosions, that kind of thing, which I tend to look forward more so than the Oppenheimers of the world and the big budget and stuff like that, because that's where the real kind of gems kind of come out. And Flora and Son was just so delightful. It was just such a great time.
Yeah, I was literally thinking about it today. The Joni Mitchell scene. I just popped in my head. It's wonderful. The lead is incredibly good. I don't care whose daughter she is. She's incredibly good in the movie. She's funny. She's charming. She does all the things she needs to do. The characters who you think you kind of hate in the beginning, you end up liking by the end. His movies are a little gift. They don't really make any money. I don't know why he keeps getting to do them.
They don't cost any money.
Somebody likes it.
Somebody likes them. I like them. I don't get to greenlight them, though. But I'm just happy whenever they come out. And Flora and Son, if you saw any of his films, it really is, I don't want to say return to form, because Sing Street wasn't a bad movie, but
no, Sing Street wasn't bad, but it wasn't as good as Once or the other ones.
I love Beginning as well. So anyway, Flora and Son is a wonderful little family movie about love and music and life, and go see it, or see it on your TV, I guess.
Begin Again is top quality Ruffalo.
Oh,
It's
might be peak Ruffalo.
I think it is. Like, it may not be. I'm not saying it's the best Ruffalo ever, but there's no better Ruffalo than that.
Yeah.
When I met him a couple of years ago at Comic-Con, I didn't talk to him about Avengers. I said, I just want to talk about it beginning.
Yeah.
And he was like, oh, okay. Like, he did that Ruffalo thing. Like, oh.
Yeah.
He was so happy.
Yeah.
I probably watched the movie 10 or 15 times. I love that movie.
Yeah. So in the same category as the small, no explosion movies, I feel like there's a subcategory that is business pictures.
You love that subgenre.
Stories of business, and I do love that subgenre, right?
They're your natural disaster movie.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. I had been tracking this for a while, and as soon as it came out, I watched it as soon as I could. Blackberry, which was the story of the rise and fall of the titular technology product, the Blackberry. Jay Baruchel in the lead, along with a masterful performance by Glenn Howerton of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia fame.
And AP Bio. Let's not...
Yeah, right. But yeah, it basically tells the story of the company RIM from Canada, who developed and created the Blackberry and created an entire product marketplace of a data connected mobile phone, and then lost it in a day when Apple announced the iPhone. There's much more time spent on the rise than there is on the fall, which is what I preferred. It's very easy.
The fall's pretty quick.
Yeah, the fall's pretty quick, and it's very easy to tell it, especially with what happened there. But the story of the rise was just so engaging, and it was done in that low budget indie film kind of way. But it takes place in the mid to late 90s, and there's an Elastica song in there, right, to put you in that time period, and takes you into the 2000s, and you see the development, especially Jay Baruchel's character, of who, when we're introduced to him, is kind of a nebbishy kind of techie nerd guy, and by the day before Apple comes out, he's wearing a black turtleneck. He's got a sense of design to him, with some success. It's a compelling story. Yes, it's a recent story, but it's one that is worth watching. Just see what happened, and it was funny too. It was well done. You want to balance the mix of like dramatic interpretation of real events with inject some humor and some like kind of larger than life performances to kind of pull the audience into, because you want to go over P&L and budgets and all that sort of stuff.
A very boring movie.
Yeah, exactly. So it struck the right balance of all of that. It was just a great, very, very well done. And I don't think I'm going to watch it in the repurposed TV series that they're doing, which I think is fascinating. They're cutting it up into episodes and releasing it on TV.
Oh, gosh.
How much Dennis Reynolds is in the character?
He is a completely different person.
That's both a positive and a negative for me. I could go either way because I just can't get enough Dennis Reynolds, basically.
The guy he was playing is a real character.
Sure.
Ron, in the same genre, did you watch the Tetris movie?
Yeah, I did. I really liked that. That nearly made my list here, but I did like the Tetris movie. Yeah.
I love that movie.
But yeah, so check out Blackberry. Good Canadian business story.
Air. Air is a movie about design and marketing. at Nike and how they designed the Air Jordan 1. And I went to see it in the theater. Ben Affleck and Matt Damon. It tickles a lot of nostalgic nerves. And I thought it was really fun. It's not amazing. It's not breaking any records. But if you're talking about a movie that, and it's funny because we were sort of talking about this earlier, as like nostalgia and references or whatever, it firmly puts you in a world that is the same world as our adolescence. And it was very effective in that way because, Damon and Affleck are basically the same generation.
I can't believe I haven't seen this.
I can't believe you haven't either.
I don't know why. It's on Prime now, right?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It's been on Prime since like April.
I know. Every time I think about it, I go, oh, yeah. And then something happens and I don't watch it. It's the problem with streaming because there's so many goddamn things and it's always going to be there. So I don't feel any urgency to get to see it.
But here's the other thing is that I got out of it and I went, sneakers are over. And since then.
Oh, you haven't bought any sneakers since then?
I haven't. Well, that's not true. But I was actually out at some point and I looked around and I was like, oh, it jumped the shark. It's over. And since then, the resale market has died. They come up with new Jordans all the time and it used to be really hard to get them or whatever. And now, it's completely changed.
Why did you think that? What made you think it?
It hit mainstream, basically. It was like a cool thing for a while. And then during the pandemic.
Killed the sneaker market?
You know why? I started buying them.
Right
there's your fucking death knell. You know what I mean? Like that's the deal. But I mean, it's totally changed. This was the top, the fever pitch. It's definitely sort of taken a big drop since then, which I just think is
interesting. Or are you just saying that in the hopes that people will stop buying and it will make your sneakers more valuable?
I bought a bunch of Vans since then.
Oh wow, it's over.
Oh man, I have a pair of suede half cabs, and they're just the best shoes ever.
I'm going to go for my final auteur director on my list here and talk about Asteroid City, which is so funny because last year I talked about the French
Laundry
Dispatch.
No.
And then we talked about the Grand Budapest Hotel a few years ago. And I used to hate Wes Anderson.
The story arc of you and Wes Anderson is fascinating.
And you still haven't seen the Royal Tenenbaums.
No, I haven't. I don't like early Wes Anderson. I just don't.
Yeah, it's not the point.
I don't like recent Wes Anderson.
You are.
I know, which is funny.
Exactly. But you are missing out on what I would say is peak Hackman.
Yeah.
I feel like that's the French Connection. But anyway, Asteroid City.
Peak old Hackman. Great Hackman.
He's always been old. He came out of the womb old. He came out of the womb, he was 55.
You know what? Make any excuse you want.
I just really respect the bizarre world he's working in right now. This is very similar to the French Dispatch. It's very episodic. It's very mannered in the way it's shot. And I just respect that he has this aesthetic that he loves and he's going to keep doing it. And I like that he gets these absolutely out of this world amazing casts. I thought this story of this strange play within a movie, it was this layered story that we kept going deeper into where the movie we were watching was actually a play being put on.
Wasn't that Rushmore?
I don't know. And then the play being put on was then this guy's crazy experience. And then I think there was a wonderful part where we leave the story and we follow an actor out for a smoke break and he talks to Margot Robbie. And it was just this wonderfully bizarre, meta layered thing that was wonderful. Tom Hanks was very interesting in the movie. It was a very non-Tom Hanks vibe and he really had to play it very restrained. I thought the Jason Schwartzman and Scarlett Johansson sort of subplot was a wonderful little love story. Yeah. I just loved it.
There's a lot going on at any given point in a Wes Anderson film.
Mm-hmm.
The production design is just above any other film. It's so
His
so meticulous.
To that is just incredible.
And then every character being truly a quote unquote character, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you wanting to know more about them, and it gets revealed through the scenes. But then to add in the layer of the postmodern storytelling approach and almost give you two movies within the one movie, it was a lot of fun to watch. And I can understand why, I don't mean this in a denigrating way, but normal people are turned off by it because what the fuck is this, right?
It's challenging. It's definitely challenging.
Yeah,
it's not normal.
Definitely challenging. Yeah, exactly.
And I just respect his commitment to it. There could be a lot of pressure to make this a more of a normal film. The setup's funny enough, right? All these characters together in this desert hotel when an alien arrives. You don't need to make it a weird movie to make it entertaining, but he's going to tell his story the way he wants to tell it, and I respect that.
Yeah. So talking about a small indie movie that is very niche and specific to me, there was a movie that I've been following along for the past couple of years about its production and then ultimate release. And it finally came out at the very end of 2022, but I saw it in 23. Pinball, the Man Who Saved the Game. This is a biopic about a gentleman by the name of Roger Sharp, who is internationally famous in the pinball hobby because he is the guy who proved to the New York City government that pinball was not a game of chance, it was a game of skill in the 70s because Fiorello LaGuardia in the 30s, following bans across the country, banned pinball from New York City. And actually, for a while, pinball was illegal in the entire country from 1940
until they smashed the machines until 70s.
They smashed them into the river and dropped them in the river and did all that sort of theatrical BS.
I know that this is obvious. That's so dumb.
Yes.
Like, it's exceedingly dumb. There was also somebody out there like, yeah, smash them.
Yeah, it was caught up in that,
They thought it was gambling.
Yeah, they thought it was gambling, and it was gambling in a way that was by chance. And anybody who plays pinball knows that it's nothing to do with chance. It's about your control of the ball and how you can do it. And Roger Sharp is famous because he called his shot, basically pulled the Babe Ruth. He showed up with a pinball machine into the New York City Chamber of Commerce or whatever the councilman chamber. He brought a pinball machine, and he was city council. That's what it is. And he was going to do a demonstration to show us a game of skill. And someone on the council thought they outsmarted him and said, "That's great, but don't do it with your pinball machine. Do it with that one that we brought in, a different game."
Ooh.
Right. And so Roger just shrugged and said, okay. And then he proceeded to, they all gathered around the pinball machine. There's a famous photo of all the city councilmen with Roger by the game. He basically showed them, he said, okay, I'm going to plunge the ball and then I'm going to do this, and this, and get a jackpot. And then he did it. Then he did it again. And then he did it again.
What year does this take place?
Did that event happen? It was in the 70s.
Okay.
It was like 75 maybe.
Just
or
trying
so.
to picture it. Well, the city's in good shape by then. They want to make sure you get rid of pinball at that point. That's going to fix things.
That's definitely not just window dressing for the real problems.
But it starred Mike Feist, who was in West Side Story, Steven Spielberg's West Side Story. He was Riff. He's been a Broadway actor, and he's been in a couple of films. He's in a film coming out next year called Challengers. That's got some buzz around it with Zendaya. He was great. What was great about the film was that the filmmakers chose not to focus on that event of the moment of him saving pinball, of like proving it, but rather telling the story of the man and his Roger's life up to that point, his marriage and his wife and his interest in pinball and balancing that off with being young in New York City and trying to make it. And it was just really heartwarming. And yes, I'm a fan of pinball and I love it. And all of us who like pinball went to see it and liked it. But this was one where I'm like, anybody who doesn't know anything about pinball would enjoy this film. It felt like a movie that they don't make anymore, if that makes any sense. It felt like a 90s indie kind of thing. And so I recommend it strongly. If it's streaming, I think it's free on Hulu. It's like 90 minutes. It's like the right length. It's just all around well done.
When you said it seemed like a kind of movie they didn't make anymore, I instantly pictured a movie starring Jimmy Stewart as the guy who saves pinball. I'm gonna pull it back here. They wouldn't make that movie anymore.
Well, he's dead, so
that's true. The timeline doesn't work at all.
No,
but like at the end, it's very uplifting.
Yeah, it's very uplifting.
Wait, are they going to use his corpse?
Well, if you wanted to make a Jimmy Stewart movie, you'd have to use his corpse. He's the only thing you can do.
Right, I see. This is not a fantasy. We have to keep it as real as possible. Got it.
Right.
Elemental. I haven't talked about a kids movie for a while. That used to be my thing. Ron, you have to take over the kids movie stuff.
I could not talk about the Paw Patrol Mighty movie.
I know, but you got to try. You got to try harder. There's a lot of whatnot about Pixar movies and sort of going back and forth, and how they're derivative or whatever. But one day I was like, let's go see a movie. We'll go see Elemental. And we go to and I just thought, and this is not like my favorite movie all time, but I thought it was perfectly delightful. It's a pretty standard, it's a metaphor about different types of people and racism and immigrants and all that kind of stuff. But, they stuck all the stuff that they had to. I'm watching it with kids and I'm like, okay, there's the right sort of lessons coming in here. And then finally, at the same time, I thought that the visuals were fantastic. So you've got people made of water and people made of gas and people made of fire. And I thought that was visualized really well. And wait.
You're saying there's a man what's made of gas in this movie?
There is a man what's made of gas, but don't worry. He's one of the good ones.
Okay, good.
I just think it has become extremely, I was going to say fashionable, but it's become very standard for people like, these aren't good anymore, like whatever. But it's like, they're not for you in a way.
Right.
And I think that it's very discounting to not realize like, yes, the stories are familiar in certain ways or whatever, but like, some of the thought and design that goes on gets completely discounted. I don't know, maybe that stuff doesn't matter to people in the same way, but I enjoyed it. Like, I go into kids' movies half the time and we don't do it a lot anymore, and you don't expect a lot, but if I can sit through the whole thing and sort of enjoy myself, like that's a good time.
Yeah, and I think there's been a lot of Pixar's had a bad run or the perception that Pixar's had a bad run
right
through the pandemic and all and the expectations after Inside Out and Toy Story and all these like really great kind of moments in movies in the last 20 years. But I took my kids to see Elemental as well, and to your point, like they loved it. They spent the entire summer, every time we went in the pool, we quote unquote played Elemental.
Right.
And one of them was Wade and the other one was Ember. And they were like, that is a sign to me that it works. But then too, as an adult watching the film, like it's clear what the allegories were and like the kind of, racism and stuff like that. But like it wasn't kind of hit it over your head, immigration and things like that. Those as a theme, you see that as an adult, but it was also a really well done telling of that story in a kind of emotional, personal kind of manner. And it looked great. And the fact that this came out and didn't have a, $100 million weekend, it was issued a flop, but then just slowly over the rest of this year continued to run in theaters and is now considered a hit.
Right.
Like a long tail hit shows that I think this category is changing and this is evolving.
You got a studio that invents a genre in a certain way. And so for a long time, everything you knew was an A+. It's very hard to keep that up while you're still sort of following a formula. So something comes out that's a B+, A-, it's like, well, they've lost it. It's like, well,
right.
What do you want? It's not Tenet. It's a different thing.
Yep.
Yeah. Anyway.
So last year in the show, I talked about, I think it was last year, how I watched all the Fast and Furious films over the pandemic lockdown situation this year. So this is the first time I got to see a Fast and Furious film in theaters. Was Fast X, the 10th, well, I guess the 11th if you count the spinoff, Fast and the Furious film in the series. And it was all I thought it would be, hoped it would be. It was loud, it was bombastic, it featured crazy, over-the-top stunts involving cars. It was directed by Louis Leterrier. Leterrier.
Incredible Hulk,
other films. He's not the best guy they've had on these films, but he made a fun enough over-the-top action story. This time they added Jason Momoa as the bad guy, who was deliciously over-the-top. There was a lot of scowling from Vin Diesel. At this point, it's this crazy it's been, multi-decade story that's been going on with these same characters. They keep adding people. Alan Ritchson was added this time. Jason Statham is still hanging around. Charlize Theron. And they keep saying they're going to end it, but they keep adding more. I think originally it was supposed to be 10, then 11, now 12. Now I think they're saying 13 films. Who knows? They can't seem to stop. They don't make any other movies, these people. They just keep making these movies over and over again. I had a good time watching it, even if it wasn't the best one in the series or even the best one in the recent series. It was still a lot of fun to see it in person in the theater and experience the sound and the picture and the overwhelmingness of the car chases in the theater setting.
It delivered for you.
It delivered. It was fun. I had a fun time in the theater that day.
We'll talk about a fun time in the theater. The fifth film in the Indiana Jones series, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, definitely got a lot of skepticism with, Harrison Ford being in his 80s and especially the bad taste in our mouth from the fourth film.
To be fair, he was 79 when they made the movie.
All right, fair enough. He was 79 when they made the movie. This is the first Indiana Jones film not directed by Spielberg. It was directed by James Mangold of Logan fame and really did its best to kind of cap the series and, leave in the, Harrison Ford and the character of Indiana Jones in a place where, it could say that's a wrap on this whole.
They got to be done, right?
Character. I hope so. I'm glad there was no passing of the mantle or anything like that.
I think they're done. Feels like they're done.
Was it as good as Raiders or as Last Crusade? No, absolutely not. You can't recapture that magic. Was it better than the fourth movie? Absolutely. Did my wife and I get a sitter and go into the city and have a nice dinner and go to movies and have a great time? Because, one of the key linkage points in our relationship is Indiana Jones films. We totally did. It delivered on the promise of a fun night at the movies in terms of what we wanted. I didn't read into it too much. I didn't overanalyze it too much. I didn't complain about the de-aging technology or the use of CGI.
Why would you? It looked amazing.
Yeah, right. And so, ultimately for what I wanted out of an Indiana Jones film, knowing all, the fact that Harrison Ford is aging, all stuff like that, it absolutely delivered on it. And I don't think it was the best movie I saw of the year, but I had a great time seeing it. And I'm glad that we had the opportunity to do it one more time. Thumbs up on Indiana Jones for me.
I think we're talking about a movie that is exactly what you want it to be in a genre setting. Dungeons and Dragons, Honor Among Thieves. Again, we've talked about a lot of these movies on our Media Splode throughout the year. But Dungeons and Dragons, Honor Among Thieves, absolutely delivered and then some on its promise about what it was supposed to be. And we've talked about this before, but it's a movie we don't see anymore. It's a very specific genre thing in a fantasy setting. Dungeons and Dragons, I don't know if people know it, but it's really a nomenclature for a genre. It doesn't really matter, who the characters are, what it is. There's nods to what the game is, but that's not really the main point. But you'll have, thieves and warriors and different kinds of monsters and things like that. I feel like we sound like old people all the time because I was like, this is the movie these used to make when we were kids. But I don't think that means that they don't make... It means that they don't make movies like this anymore. And I don't think that there's an age limit on those sorts of things. because everything, not everything, but so many of the big releases that we see in theaters are very similar to one another. And then also at the same time, Dungeons and Dragons movies have existed and they've never done well. And so to sort of have them get it right through here, I thought it was great. It's sort of, I was trying to think it's almost like a Guardians of the Galaxy kind of successfulness in that you saw it and you're like, I don't know if they'll be able to make that work. But they did. They did all of the right things and just sort of made a fun movie with a fun ensemble cast. It wasn't trying to be more than it was. There was no great message. It was just a fun time with some swords and some magic stuff.
Doesn't get better than that.
Exactly.
Yep. I'm right there with you. I thought this was a great time in the movies.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's there's one of those things, I think if you're a kid and you're 8 or 9 or whatever, and you watch that, this is one of those things wow, I like this kind of thing. And also if we look, in comics, we see stories like this all the time in comics, but they have not found their way into movies for whatever reason, which is the strangest thing.
I mean, I think what you're saying, it felt kind of like an 80s movie filtered through the modern lens of... I love this. I thought it was terrific. They still can't tell this movie completely straight, right? They have to kind of wink and nod at things. This is as close as you're probably going to get to them doing it straight nowadays.
Winking and nod, but in a way that I think went with the fun and wasn't cheap.
No, it wasn't winking and a nod away, because usually what happens is they're winking and a nodding in a way that undermines it, like the Brady Bunch films, right? It's like, isn't this all stupid? Well, what am I doing here then? If you think of this stupid, that's the tone a lot of these films go for. That wasn't the tone of this movie. This was this is incredibly cool and fun. We're still going to wink and nod at things, which is totally fine. It just felt very much also like that kind of 80s adventure movie that they don't really make. And this movie did okay, but probably not enough that I'll ever do another one. I had a good time. I had a really good time. All my neighbors and friends who play D&D like crazy loved it.
Yeah, I hope they make another one. I'd totally go see another one for sure.
Oh, me too. It's just, didn't do well enough exactly, but we'll see.
We need more Chris Pine. How many times have I got to say it?
He was great.
Yes.
He was great. What's great about him is he doesn't take himself too seriously, at least in the roles he picks. And he's willing to play parts that are kind of silly. So, the final film we're going to talk about, Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning. I'm taking off the part 1 because they're taking off the part 1 because part 2 was supposed to come out.
No, part 1 stays on it. The name of the movie is Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1.
They're removing it.
They changed the part 2. The part 1 still is called part 1.
Then what is the part 1 of if there's no part 2?
I know. That's why it's crazy.
So part 2 was supposed to come out this coming year, but the strike killed that. So they're changing the name of the second one. Anyway, I love these crazy, wacky films. Similar to Fast X, this probably wasn't the best one of the series. It wasn't the best one of the modern, and I'm saying modern for Mission Impossible because it started in the 90s, of the Christopher McQuarrie films. This wasn't the best one of them. However, it's still Tom Cruise doing Mission Impossible stuff on the big screen. The whole sequence on the train made me clench up. The whole jumping off the cliff with the motorcycle and parachuting that they spoiled in all the trailers, but was still kind of crazy to watch and unfold in real time. And he's an entertainer, and goddamn, he's going to kill himself entertaining us one day, but hasn't happened yet. It's still fun. The cast is still hanging in there. It's always nice to see Ving Rhames still around. They've actually created a nice little ensemble here with Simon Pegg. They added Haley Atwell, Vanessa Kirby, Rebecca Ferguson. They brought back Henry Czerny, the original guy from the original film. Shea Whigham's in it. Carrie Elways. They've got a great little group of actors on these films. I really enjoy them. Shea Whigham gets punched a lot. He's really good at taking punches.
So good.
He's great at getting punched.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it. Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning, not part 1, just Dead Reckoning. This one, of course, the bad guy was AI. It's just this is what it's going to be in Hollywood from now on out. AI villains forever. So those are some of the films we enjoyed, some of our favorite films of the year. There were more films, but those are the ones we enjoyed.
Yeah, it's I definitely, going back to what we said, I definitely think it was a good year for movies. I, found myself in the theater pretty regularly, although not like the good old days, right? Not like
I went 20 times to the theater.
Every time it was a good time, and it was really hard to nail down, this was the favorite movie of the year. If I had to narrow it down, I'm probably narrowed down to The Killer, The Holdovers, or Killers of the Flower Moon. Those are kind of in my top 3.
Yeah, I mean, looking at Barbie, Oppenheimer, Killers of the Flower Moon, The Holdovers is my top 4, and then I probably put Flora and Son as my 5th. So those are my top 5. I just got to figure out what order they go in.
Yeah, I guess Oppenheimer's in there, I suppose. Yeah,
I mean,
so
I know this is the thing we beat on as old men, but I really do think the theater experience is unmatched. And I was listening to somebody talk about it today on a podcast, and the shared social experience is really important, I think, as a society. And you can say, okay, it's only been happening for 100 years, but it's been shaping our society for 100 years. It's crying together, it's laughing together, it's tensing up together, it's feeling that emotional release together. It's having it in a room with a bunch of people who you wouldn't normally be in a room with and sharing a valuable emotional experience. I don't care how good your TV is at home. I don't care how good your sound system is, you're still going to look at your phone. You're still going to get up and go get food. You're still going to get up and go to the bathroom. It's not going to be the same. And it's unfortunate that we are shifting as a society away from shared experiences to individual solitary experiences. And that's probably not good for us as a race of people. But here we are.
Jeez, got heavy now.
He's getting maudlin in his old age.
Given any opportunity to watch a movie at home or in the theater, I choose the theater every time. I ended up watching the Holdovers at home, and what I do, I put my phone in the other room, right? So not to be distracted in any way, shape, or form. I want to be connected to it, but it can't beat the theater experience as far as I'm concerned.
Where's the Holdovers showing?
I rented it. It's on all the platforms.
Oh, it's on for rent. Okay.
Yeah.
It's on all the platforms, guys.
I mean, TV is great, but there's a reason why we start the show with movies.
Totally. There is something special about movies, and it's actually really interesting how, especially when you look at a lot of the companies, the major media companies, or the Disneys and the NBC Universals and all this sort of stuff. It's almost like, they have so many things going on in these mega corporations, but like we define whether they're doing well or not by their movie success.
Yeah.
It is such a big portion of entertainment in this country and has been for the last 100 years, and right now we're in time of transition, and I don't know where it's going to go, but I hope it goes in the way that we're used to and excited about, but we'll see.
Let's move over to television now, the aforementioned television, and start with the television disclaimer. We each picked 5 shows. That's 15 shows. There were approximately 7,000 shows. So your favorite may not be on this list. It probably isn't. Doesn't mean we didn't like it. And it may mean we didn't watch it, but it doesn't mean if we did, we didn't like it. Just we had to pick 5, and that's where we ended up here. And we were sorry we didn't get to talk about all the shows that we watched this year. We probably could have doubled our number here and still talked about shows we enjoyed this year because there's so many TV shows. But we're going to plow forward and talk about Season 2 of The Bear. Season 1 of The Bear is probably everyone's favorite show last year. Bear Season 2 was very different from Season 1. In many ways, as good. Season 1 is all about the frenetic and intense situation that the main character was going through, trying to keep his brother's restaurant alive and maybe reinvent it. Season 2 was all about reinventing it, but not in a customer-facing way. So it was slightly more sedate, but more intense, I thought, emotionally. I still think about Cousins' episode. Each episode kind of focused on a different character. In Cousins' episode, where he sort of found himself, found his confidence, found his...
Oh, that was the best episode of the season. That was so
found
good.
his purpose in life. I
wear suits now.
Yeah, that was so good.
That was one of the best episodes of TV that I've seen in a long time.
Hands down. Great use of a cameo.
Yes.
And also just like one of those things where you watch somebody go through a positive change. It's a character who had like almost no redeeming values to a certain extent. Right. He was, like he loved his cousin. That's about it. And then you watch this and you expect, the thing you normally see is still you're going to watch him fail or something, because anything can happen on this show. But instead you watch him get it, and it transforms him. And like, that's so redemptive.
He's a man who had nothing. And he found something to have. He found something that he could do that he was good at. And everyone talks about the family Christmas dinner episode.
Yep.
And it was a great episode, but to me, the best episode.
I'm still stressed out about that.
Yeah, the best episode is still Cousins' episode.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the best episode was Cousins' episode, but the Christmas episode, just because it came at a breathing point in the season, halfway through the extended runtime of the episode, and just the relentless stress of the episode, it definitely is important and was a moment of the season for sure, like a high moment. But the cousin bottle episode was just so good. It was just like, oh, it's great. And ultimately, the whole season as itself, I feel like the first season was so fantastic and so unique and so fresh or whatever, but I almost feel like it was like precursor to this season. Yeah. Like this feels like what the show's really about, right?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Well, we don't even know what comes next or when, so maybe he never makes it out of that locker.
And that was crushing. That the method is like, you're going to have to marry this life, and it sucks. And you can't not do it. And that is fascinating. That's really well done. What more can be said about Perry Mason? HBO's...
We're fucking pissed. That's what I wanted to say.
High-end,
say a lot about it.
High dollar, not necessarily superstar laden, but just amazing actor laden shows. Takes place in 30s, 40s Los Angeles. Very little to do with the television show Perry Mason that many of us knew as kids. Just thoughtful, smart, dramatic, exciting, beautiful TV. Matthew Rhys he's my favorite actor right now. And so to watch him, be there and make his sad face.
God, it just kills me.
Yeah, I'm not surprised that it didn't really catch on.
It was nice of HBO to make a show for 3 people.
Yeah.
It's almost like a charity job for them. They're like, these
my
3
wife
guys
loved it.
who have
That's
this
4
podcast.
people.
That's true. Let's say 6 to 7 people.
But I mean, I loved it so much. And I, the first time through watching that first season, it was like, this is amazing. Being so excited. Then finally the second one episode. And then that crushing realization that this is all you're going to get.
Right.
And being like, all right, I guess I'll enjoy the hell out of it. Now, there's other shows that you find out they're not going to go, and I've stopped watching them. But like this, I ate up every single little moment. It is a delightful little gem.
Kind of a cliffhanger.
But that also makes sense to me. Like if you're talking about like a show like that, you almost want to end it on a cliffhanger, even if you're not going to tell it. Just to know, hey, there's something else coming. Something else happens. You're going to have to tell that story in your own head, though.
Yeah, it was so good. It was my favorite thing HBO did in a while.
It's such a bummer that we're not going to get more. What I loved about Perry Mason was just getting lost in the time period and the location and just the mood of it.
And the powerhouse acting.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
They had so many great character actors on that show.
It's the same reason why, and it's not on this list, but Connor, I feel like The Gilded Age could be on this list for both of us,
absolutely.
and for all of us, I think, because again, it's like for an hour, you get lost in the mood of the time period, right? Like that.
And it's the most low stakes show on TV that I need. I need a low stakes show.
Right. But also
So
that's an elevated sort of dramatic part too. Like, I don't know. They're not similar to me in that way. I get by with it either way or another. But I also think that like Matthew Rhys, he excels in being in a series. He's a fantastic actor. You can put him in a movie. All of that's fine. But if you get to watch him own a character over a long period of time,
the more tortured, the better.
Oh, that's the thing. And you get to see him be happy for a little bit, and then someone beats the shit out of him. And then it's him and Shea Wiggum hitting each other, which, those are two punchable motherfuckers.
More Shea Wiggum getting punched.
That sad fight on the bridge, yeah. And normally his character doing it to himself.
And you knew. And you were rewarded that at the end of that fight, you were going to see the two of them sitting on a curb sharing a drink. And that's what you got. Man. It's so good. Yep. Are you going to find love with a pretty lady? It is not going to work out.
You're going to sabotage it.
Yes, you are. Oh,
that was Sam Waterston's daughter.
Yes, it was. There's a lot of that going on these days.
Well, that's how Hollywood works. It's a family business.
Sure.
She was also in the Steve Jobs Michael Fassbender movie. I spent half of the Perry Mason season trying to figure out who she was, at least where I knew her from. And I was like, oh, that's where she was.
Do you do that manually? You don't go to IMDb?
Yes, I do. I try not to look it up at IMDb.
I won't do it during the show.
Right.
Unless I can't focus.
Right.
You know what I mean? If it's taking away from it,
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
And then, because nothing like that relax of, and then you can move along.
Well, for me, probably my top show of the year, the one that delivered the most and surprised the most and got the most enjoyment was earlier in 2023. Probably, I would say, I don't know if it's the lone hit, but one of the only hits on the Peacock streaming service, Poker Face, starring Natasha Lyonne. This show just was, again, like talk about like, taking an hour to go somewhere else and to kind of get lost, the escapism kind of aspect of it.
No.
Oh. No, that was Russian Dolls. I got it. Okay.
That was Russian Doll. Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Sorry.
I love the episodic nature of it, that every episode was its own self-contained mystery that Natasha Lyonne's character was going to solve, be it a murder mystery or whatever the crime that is being, kind of in Columbo kind of way, but still having an overarching theme throughout the season of her being on the run and the guy who she's on the run from, which we do get a satisfying result at the end of the season. It just harkened back to a type of TV that they don't make anymore, or don't make that much anymore.
I think we've got our theme for the show this year.
Yeah, we do.
I think it really do. Yeah, I know, which just makes me feel very old and tired.
And
but it was so somewhat refreshing in that way. And it was the kind of thing where like we slow paced out watching it because we didn't want it to be over that quickly, right? Like they released the first 3 episodes, then it was weekly, and we watched it weekly because we wanted to stretch it out and have that bit of enjoyment. The premise being Natasha Lyonne's character has a innate sixth sense of when people are lying.
Wait, are they doing our bit? You can't give people powers.
And that both gets her,
a good one.
She benefits from it, but it also gets her in a lot of trouble, and how that all plays out. And each episode, she's on the run from somebody who she got mixed up with, and so each episode carried through her character and her character's point of view. But each episode was fresh and different, took place in a different part of the country. You spent half the episode trying to figure out what's going on and who the players are and what's the story, and then it hits the gas and you see it resolve and you see her solve the mystery or whatever, and then move on. Just so much fun. I can't recommend Poker Face more. It was just totally delightful.
This year we saw the final season of Reservation Dogs, one of my favorite shows on television on Hulu, about kids living on a reservation in Oklahoma trying to figure out their life in the face of tragedy and generational trauma and all the things that the native tribes go through. This season, at first, everyone was very separated. The characters were all together. In season 2, they sort of separated at the end. This season took a while to get them back together, and that was at first frustrating, but they allowed every episode to sort of drill down on their characters, their place in the community, and their worlds. And by the end, it was just so emotionally impactful. By the end, it was all sort of came together. A wonderful cast of actors. People like Wes Studi got to come in and do very off-brand roles. His character was very funny.
What did I just see him in? Where he was like a lawyer or
I don't
something.
know.
I forget, but I thought, oh, that's a really interesting role for him. Anyway, so.
He's a great actor. Lily Gladstone from Kills of the Flower Moon has a small but pivotal role in the show. Zahn McClarnon, who was in many things, including a season of Fargo, and he's the lead on Dark Winds. He plays a very different kind of Navajo cop. Not Navajo, he's a Navajo cop on Dark Winds. Tribal cop on this show that he does play on Dark Winds. He's sort of the comic relief. Great characters, great actors who don't often get to play roles like this. There's a couple of devastating episodes. The whole episode that was dealing with the generational trauma of the forced schooling that happened where they took the kids away from their parents and tried to make them into Americans. That was a rough episode. But at the end of everyone, there was a hopefulness. There was a real sense of community and just really great. We had sort of a mini explosion of native-focused shows and movies in the last couple of years, and it's been really heartening to see. A lot of these actors get to show what they can do. And not just the actors, but the writers and directors. Sterling Harjo was the voice behind this series, and it's just wonderful, really wonderful show.
I've heard nothing but good things. We watched the first episode and haven't continued past that, but not for lack of like it not being good. Yeah. Just just
3 seasons, and they're half-hour episodes, so it's not a huge time commitment. 27 episodes, I think, total. So it's not the main guy, Bear, played by DeFaro Wunatai. He's really, really charismatic and compelling actor. I could see him going places. And also, just want to mention that the main female lead, DeVary Jacobs, she's a really accomplished filmmaker. She wrote and directed one of the best episodes of the season, which included a very big celebrity guest appearance, which was shocking and did not leak out and almost knocked us off the couch. It was very good.
I did not plan or want to watch The Last of Us.
Ditto.
A genre show about more or less zombies adapted from a video game plot, which I understand, by the way, without being an asshole, very good video game.
It's also the future, apparently. You see the Fallout video, the Fallout trailer? Yeah.
Walton Goggins.
Yep.
This is one of those. This happened first with Lost, where Lindsay's like, "I'm going to watch this," and I was like, "I don't want to watch that." And then I was like, "Fine, I'll sit down," because she was like, "I want to watch a thing with you because I think we would enjoy it." And produced, the showrunner by Craig. Help me. Greg Mazin of, I'm primarily thinking of Chernobyl, which was just excellent.
And to be fair, he's co-showrunning with the creative director of the game, which I think is very important to why it's so successful.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you, but I don't know that I can speak to it.
Craig's obviously the TV guy, but I think having the guy behind the game keeps it authentic.
I think it's authentic and that maybe matters to people in the game. I don't know if it makes a show better, but it very well might. It probably does. Because as I understand it, it's very true to the game, at least the cutscenes.
Yeah.
Anyway, the point being, I got into it. I got real into it. The zombies, the monsters, creep me out. I do not like them, which is what is supposed to happen. Pedro Pascal is undeniable as a person to watch. I originally know him from Narcos long ago, and I've watched him sort of get to be a bigger and bigger deal. Most people probably first came across him in The Mandalorian, where he does a hell of a lot with just his voice. But in this show, to watch him...
He's so good on it.
He's so good. And also, like, every clip you see of him in real life, you're like, what a fucking goofball. And then he can go and play that. A lot like Matthew Rhys, really.
Yep.
And, Bella, I was going to say... Yeah, who had a smallish part, but very memorable part in Game of Thrones. Really great relationship with them. It ends up being an incredibly intelligent, incredibly thoughtful show, but is also very visceral. And then, again, we're talking about single episodes. The Nick Offerman episode.
Well, that was the one, right? I mean, like, my thought going into that episode was, I'm giving this one more.
Right.
Because the first episode I really liked. The second one I liked less. This is more about sort of the zombies. And the first episode was all about that really masterful, creepy way they introduced the chaos to the world. The second episode it felt more like a standard zombie show, and I was like, Yep. I was like, I'll give him one more week, and then the third episode comes in, blows your brain out of the back of your skull, and I was in after that for the rest of the season.
That was the only episode of the show I watched.
It was amazing.
It gave you what you'd expect, but not out of this show. You know what I
It
mean?
would also show the possibilities of the show, right? It
Yeah.
didn't have to be about the main characters. It
Yep.
didn't have to be about
Yep.
the conflict. It could be about anything.
You know, beautifully acted, written, directed, that bit. But the rest of the show was good. I don't mean to.
No, I love the rest of it.
It reminds me a lot of, there was that one episode of Mythic Quest.
Right.
In that first season. And I don't know who did this before that, but they, to me, are the sort of modern progenitor of that kind of deal. And then I think The Bear's done it a couple times. So that's become like a TV thing, is to be like, do one of those episodes.
Yeah, a side story to take you out of the main story.
But show you what they can do.
Oh, God, so good.
Anyway, great show. I was 1,000% into it. It was the best possible version of this kind of story that I think you can do. And, so much of that has to do with the talent involved. But it was a really nice surprise. I'd take Perry Mason over it any day of the fucking week, though.
Okay. It's not a competition.
It is. It's HBO.
It's not TV.
Talking about a nice surprise, I stumbled on Paramount Plus, a joint production between Paramount Plus and the BBC, a show called The Gold, which after I watched the first episode, I was like, why did I discover this and not Josh or Connor? Because this seems like way up more their alleys than up my alley.
You're not wrong.
Yeah, this is a fantastic crime drama that tells the story of a robbery in England in the early 1980s, where a handful of robbers go to attempt to steal some currency that is being transferred at Heathrow. Very similar to the Goodfellas Air France haul, where they know that overnight, like, bags of money are being stored to be sent back to the country where they came from. And instead they break in, and instead of finding the money, they actually, in the same storage unit, is 3 tons of gold bullion, which they then steal.
I hate when that happens.
So the robbery happens in the first episode, spoiler. The series is not about the robbery. The series is about everything that happens after the robbery, right? Because once you've stolen 3 tons of gold bullion, you can't just go and sell it. It's how do you convert that into money that you can actually get, and money laundering and
Right.
all the mechanics of that and stuff like that. And what the gold becomes is the gold becomes kind of threefold of a TV series. And that one, it's the police unit investigating the crime. It's the criminals trying to get away with the crime. And then at the same time, it is a commentary on class in England in the 80s.
Right.
With New Order as the soundtrack. It was just like, it was fantastic.
Did you know New Order would be the soundtrack, or was that just a happy coincidence?
That was happy coincidence. I mean, I didn't know anything about the show. And
It's contemporaneous.
I think it was the second episode, and the whole first scene was set to New Order. And I was like, oh, right. But it's got the main guy, I think, was in Downton Abbey, right?
Yes.
Hugh Bonneville.
Huge Bonneville.
Hugh Bonneville, the main cop, was Downton Abbey.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. Hugh Bonneville is the main cop from, and he's fantastic. And then the main kind of
Slow
criminal,
Horses.
kind
Horses,
of guy
yeah.
is Jack Lowden from Slow Horses.
Yeah.
Which is not on this list, but I just want to go ahead and say shout out. It's the fucking best.
I'm hearing good things about season 3. I might start watching it. I heard
oh my
Slow
God.
Horses are good.
I'm halfway through it, and it's terrific so
I'm going
far.
to tell you a thing right now.
You would love it.
Gary Oldman eating noodles. That's all you need to know.
That's great. Okay, cool.
No, you don't know.
But anyway, also Dominic Cooper, who was in Preacher and played Howard Stark in the early MCU days. It was just all in all just a complete, just like surprising delight. And I love, the fact that it's based on reality, based on something that truly happened, and told in a very engaging kind of way. And each episode, and it was short. I mean, it's only like 5 or 6 episodes, and each episode was so well crafted. And I'm delighted to hear that it was renewed. It's going to get a second season, which I figured out how that happens, but it's a spoiler, so I won't say anything.
After you talked about our media split, I watched half of the first episode.
Yeah.
And in the middle of it, when my wife, who was out of town that weekend, which is why I was watching it, because I figured she wouldn't want to watch it, called to say she was listening to the media split and she really wanted to watch The Gold, so I had to stop it.
You didn't have to.
Well, I winced and I hit pause and I stopped it. Holiday break is coming. When I always go to my mom's house, and we always watch a couple of shows, and she loves British
you're
shows.
gonna
So
love
we're gonna watch The Gold over the break.
Yeah.
Couple things is that I've already done revisionist history in my head, and Connor was the one who suggested it. I cannot believe that Ron was the one who did it.
It was wrong.
It's so strange.
It doesn't make any sense.
It makes none. In fact, I've forgotten since I've said this that I was like, so when Connor said, no,
Your brain won't accept it.
I have just been given leave to watch the program on my own.
Oh, good.
I think I'm halfway through the second episode, and it's been a difficult one to convince that, hey, let's watch this thing that you have to pay a lot of attention to and listen to the accents and do the whole thing when you're very tired at night. So I've been given leave to watch it on my own, and I will be doing that soon.
Oh,
We can all commiserate after the holidays about The Gold.
Mm-hmm.
Pop quiz, guys. Who is the longest serving original character on streaming?
I don't understand the
no,
question.
Bosch.
Hieronymus Bosch.
Oh,
Oh, God.
Next year will be his 10th season.
Jeez. I don't know a single person who watches it other than you.
It's fine. I don't care. In a world.
I think my dad watched. Actually, I think my dad watches.
I would love to watch it with your dad. In a world where shows, no matter how popular, go maybe 3 seasons if you're lucky. Bosch is on its 2nd series, its 10th total season on Prime. Now it's on Freevee, but I still watch it on my Prime app. I don't know how that works, other than there are ads on it, but there's going to be ads on everything. It's an LA cop show. It's one of those shows based on, it's like Slow Horses, Josh. It's based on a novel series. It takes place in LA. It's full of terrific actors, a lot of them from The Wire. Each season is like 2 or 3 interlocking stories from the books that come together in various interesting ways. And for some reason, I think it's probably to do with, there's all kinds of reasons why shows get canceled. And sometimes like there's like escalator clauses in contracts where you have to pay the actors more and more and more unless it's a new series. It used to be Bosch, now it's Bosch Legacy, which is what I'm talking about, where at the end of the series, they had Bosch quit the force. He was a homicide detective in LAPD. Now he's a private detective working for the lawyer from the first show. And his daughter's now a rookie cop. And so it's basically the same show. They just moved the pieces around. They got rid of some of the actors, although every major actor from the first series came back for at least 1 episode, including Lance Reddick, who was a major character in the first season. Now he just came back for 1 episode.
Isn't Marlo Stanfield in that show?
He was his partner in the original series. Okay. He came back for 1 episode for Bosch Legacy, but he was the partner. But they are working on 2 Bosch spinoffs, one of which would feature him as the lead. So they're making a whole Bosch shared universe. That's how popular the show is.
How does he not play the most evil person ever?
He's really good.
I have no doubt it, but he's so fully formed as evil.
It took me a while, honestly, to look past Marlo in the beginning when he was on the show, because he's so good in that role. But eventually, you forget about it. But they're literally creating a Bosch shared universe. They're working on 2 spinoffs.
Boschverse?
The Boschverse. And I'm into it.
All right, fair enough.
It's ridiculous. It's fun. It's a very good cop based on a novel show. Does stuff a different feel than regular cop shows. It's more novelistic. I really like it.
Just to close a loop here, it turns out that I have mixed up Wes Studi and Zach McLarnon, who played a lawyer in No Hard Feelings.
No Hard Feelings, yes.
If it occurred to me that Wes Studi must be old now, I would know that wasn't him.
He's very good.
No, absolutely. They're both in Reservation Dogs. It made it harder to research.
They both are in Reservation Dogs, yeah.
Justified City Primeval. I got through this again. I had leave to do it on my own, and then I plowed through this show. It is a return to Justified Raylan Givens. Nobody from the previous series is in this one. Raylan finds himself in Detroit, mixed up with a bunch of criminal stuff and, an arch enemy, a psychopathic killer guy who was also in Narcos.
And he was in Indiana Jones.
Yeah, but he was in Narcos.
I'm just saying, he was in Indiana Jones.
He was the Ray Liotta. He was the Henry Hill of Narcos for a while.
Yes, he was great in Narcos.
It's true. I think this series was not at all up to the snuff of the old show, but at the same time, you talk about I'd pay to watch Raylan Givens read the phone book, and I would.
Yeah.
I can find a lot of faults with the show. I thought the villain was very good. Besides that, I think it was largely unmemorable, except they say you can't go home, but I was very happy to spend time with Raylan Givens again. And that really carried me through. I never got bored. I always wanted to know, I always wanted to watch the next episode. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And that is just because of the charisma of Timothy Olyphant in a way, but also him playing that character and watching him play that character as a slightly older person in a different setting. They thought he was out, but they sucked him back in. And sort of how it ends. I don't know if it was a great ending, but as a coda to a thing, as a little bit of extra, I will take it. I was really happy with it. It was better. I was a little worried, but it didn't matter in the end.
That was also based on a novel.
Yeah.
It was based on an Elmore Leonard book that did not feature Raylan Givens, but they squished him into the role, and they gave their character from the book a cameo. He was the guy at the bar, the ex-cop he met. At least they threw him a bone, even though he wasn't the lead.
Yep.
Oliphant's the best.
Yep. And his daughter was in it, too. She wasn't great, but whatever.
So one of the reasons why I have Paramount Plus as a streaming service is because as Conor and I share this love of the Star Trek brand, the Star Trek universe.
And the Good Wife universe. That's why we have.
And the Good Wife, yeah, for sure. The good fight. No, but the fact that there's been a steady stream of new Star Trek content produced and released is a joy, because Star Trek is I wouldn't even, I wouldn't call it a guilty pleasure. It's just a straight up pleasure that I've enjoyed since I was a kid. And I feel like in past years, we've talked about Star Trek Discovery and Picard, and which I think you're going to talk about next, Conor.
Yep.
But there was the one outlier, at least for me, over the past couple of years, which was Star Trek Strange New Worlds, which I did not watch the first season when it came out. And for those who don't know, Star Trek Strange New Worlds is a series telling the story of the Enterprise as captained by Pike, who was the captain before Kirk. Right. So this is pre-Star Trek, the original series. You have a young Spock. You have Captain Pike in the captain's chair, a whole different crew, but it's the same Enterprise that we know and love. And for some reason, when it first came out, I just kind of went, I don't want a prequel and blah, 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 like all that kind of baggage. And then this year rolled around and, we had a lull in stuff to watch. And I knew that Star Trek Strange New World season 2 was starting up. So I was like, all right, let's dive in. Let's watch season 1. And then we can go right into season 2. And within 3 episodes, both me and my wife were like, this might be one of the best shows on TV, like period. It is so well done and so fantastic. And season 2 built on what they did in season 1 in such a way, it really feels like a modern interpretation of the Star Trek, the original series, wagon train to the stars feeling, which is a different feeling than the other Star Trek shows that are currently, whether it's Discovery or Picard or the other ones, Lower Decks. This is as akin to the original Kirk, Spock, Bones stories of the 60s. And they're weaving it in such a way that it's all in the same universe. There are loose ties to the Star Trek the original series. There are dotted lines to Star Trek the original series episodes, but not in a fan service, Josh, kind of roll your eyes, bang your head on the table, like trying too hard kind of way. It's done very cleverly, very smartly. And, it's the kind of thing where I'm like, I can't wait for the next season. This was a wonderful surprise for me, although I shouldn't be because I do like Star Trek. It definitely delivered in a way that I didn't expect.
I don't even know if Star Trek Picard is good. Season 3, I think it was. I have no objective relationship to it. It was a full reunion of the original Next Generation cast. They got to play together one more time, and I loved every minute of it. I think it was good, but it doesn't matter.
Every minute was fantastic.
It doesn't matter if it was good or not. I enjoyed it. The original series ended really well. It has one of the great final episodes.
With the Next Generation.
Yeah. So we didn't need to bring them back to justify anything or to make up for something. So we didn't need it. But they got to play these characters many decades on. They're all slightly different, but they're all still the same in the important ways. And they got to have one important, crazy adventure together. And it also sort of served as a coda, an ending to the original continuity. That world of Star Trek that started in the 60s with Shatner and Nimoy and DeForest Kelley and everybody else, and went through decades of movies and TV shows, and is now sort of ended with Picard because they have this new Discovery universe, including Strange New World. But the final season of Picard featured stuff from the original series. It had Chekhov, and it featured little shout-outs or nods to all the series that have come before. It was a story that enveloped the entire sort of history of the Federation, and so it allowed them to do all those things. And it felt like a really nice, sad, not sad because of the story, but sad for me, that the ending of this thing that's been very important to me in terms of, I've been a Star Trek, I'm not a fanatic, but I've been a Star Trek fan my entire life, watching all the shows, not all the shows, I never watched Enterprise, but all the films, I've watched them over and over again. So that ending was very emotional. And the fact that they got to have that moment, and not to spoil it, but the fact that they all got to have that sort of final scene together, hanging out, just being friends again. It was just wonderful. It was just really wonderful to see all those actors together. They all still like each other. You can see it. You can see it.
There's a bond there for sure. And the series wasn't done in a way to just as an excuse for them to all get together. It still told a important chapter of this ongoing, tapestry and continued the story arcs of these characters, into their later years. It definitely wasn't, it wasn't indulgent in any way.
No.
Like, everything felt that it had proper value.
Yeah, I mean, season 2 had problems. I still enjoyed watching it. Season 1 I thought was terrific. 1 and 3, it felt like a nice send-off for Patrick Stewart's Picard character.
Yep.
When they first announced it, I think Ron and I were both like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
But it ended up being worthwhile. And this final season really was. There was a couple of episodes that were terrific.
Yep.
There was one I'm thinking of in the very beginning. I can't remember the details of it, Ron, but they were stuck in that nebula because it's Star Trek.
Oh, yeah. That whole mini story arc within it was fantastic. And with the actual ship fighting stuff.
And the captain. Yeah. The captain character. One of the best characters in recent Star Trek, where he starts off as loathsome and hateful, and in the best possible way has an arc of redemption to the point where he ends up saving everyone. I just love
Comic-Con's own Todd Stashwick.
It was, I thought, a wonderful season and a nice send-off to that show, those characters, that cast, but also this world that Roddenberry created in the 60s that lasted up until 2023.
It's still lasting.
Yeah, but it's not really. But that's you and I's difference of opinion.
I think it's pretty amazing that there are. I feel like there's a lot of Star Trek shows still to this day.
There's an animated series. There's all kinds of.
It's being supported. I mean, they wouldn't keep making them. That's pretty fascinating to me.
Fascinating.
I got
Fascinating,
that.
Captain.
I got that.
Well, you have your own side to talk about now.
For All Mankind, I don't know if people like this or talk about it or whatever, but we're talking about an alternate history of the space race. The 4th season, yes, is in process right now, and I am enjoying it. Every season is 10 years after the one that came before it. So the very first episode starts with learning that Neil Armstrong was not the first person on the moon. Instead, it was a Russian, and it goes from there. There are many real characters, although at this point, it's not too many actual people, real people represented by characters on the show. But having been in it so long, you have a relationship with all these people. It's just super dramatic and also melodramatic and fun. And it's gotten a little bit wacky in some ways. And it is one of my favorite shows on TV.
How has it changed since season 1, other than the time of the characters? Has it changed?
We're in an alternate history kind of thing. So there's a lot of we're in.
But I mean, has the tone changed? Has the sort of...
No, but at first you're watching it adhere to real history to a certain extent. And then you see how those things change. And there was a lot of sort of fun in those reveals. And that's kind of past now. And so the stories that are going on, you'll see it interact with the real world. But there's some really sort of intelligent things that are going on where the space technology in this show is far beyond what our space technology on. So we're in the early 2000s, I think, at this point. Smartphones don't exist yet, but they have colonies on Mars, but there's still a Soviet Union. And so it's much more speculative now based on their timeline. But it's there's a lot of really subtle things that I think are very thoughtful. Now, this is from Ronald D. Moore and others, but he's one of the main showrunners who did, the excellent Battlestar Galactica show. And it feels like that. It feels like that kind of drama and those kind of stakes with, again, an ensemble cast and a bunch of characters who you're spending time with. It's I don't think it's a cheap show, but it kind of has a little bit of that feeling of like a sci-fi show, like a sci-fi network show, where it's not quite network money being thrown at it, but in a way that works for it. But Battlestar Galactica, again, was like that. It was this is a little cheap, but in such a way that it really lets sort of the acting and the story stand out in a way because, production's not bad at all, but it's just a little bit.
Can I make a comment about that?
Yeah.
This may be my old age talking, but I'm coming around to the idea that it doesn't matter to me anymore if a show looks cheap. Because ultimately, these are fancy plays being put on.
Exactly. That's the thing.
We don't go to a show at Broadway and say, well, this looks fake, because it's not about that.
Right.
I mean, you want it to look nice and everything, but to me, ultimately, it's if the story's good and you're believing the world, I don't necessarily mind if the special effects are not up to par or whatever.
Anyone who's watched classic British TV, any kind of drama.
I'm not here for that. I'm here for the story and the characters. Yeah. So for me, it's I'm watching a really fancy play being put on. If I can see the sets, who cares? It's not about that.
It's just a great, smart, fun show. And I'm really surprised it's still coming out. I'm shocked, but I'll take it.
What is it? It's season 4 now? That's crazy. I'm still cracking up. There was a throwaway joke on John Oliver about Apple TV Plus, where it's Apple TV Plus where stars go to hide. Right? Yeah. It's just they're just quietly all these shows that are just persisting, and you don't even I know For All Mankind existed. 4 seasons.
There's no stars in it though.
It feels like it just came out.
Joel Kinnaman is the biggest star in it. It's not that. It's an ensemble. It's like Battlestar Galactica. There were no, Edward James Olmos was the biggest star in that. Who cares?
Yeah.
Oh, whoa. Are you slacking off Edward James Olmos?
I am not. I'm saying that he was not necessarily a big box office draw in 2004 or whenever that show started.
Don't make him not look at you on set. Ron, I'm really excited for you to talk about this next one.
Well, yeah, so it's funny because it's you guys who know me and know how much I watch TV, I don't, and it's ironic that, my last 2 shows I'm talking about here fall in this category, but I don't generally fall for the reality TV genre.
I don't think this is a reality TV show.
I mean, it definitely, if it falls in there, it falls into into the premise.
I think it is because one of them was not aware. And that was real
acting.
I know, but I didn't believe the entire time.
Let's let Ron talk about it.
Anyway, yeah, so I'll give all due credit to my sister, who has much different TV watching tendencies than I do, who told me over the summer, it's you got to check out the show Jury Duty. It's hysterical. And I was like, well, what do you mean? And she went on to further explain that, the premise of this reality show is that they, built a fake courtroom and fake documentary being produced about the judicial process in order to pick one subject who's not aware that it's fake and have him go through this crazy jury duty process in LA that included James Marsden as being one of the members on the jury or an alternate on the jury, and see what they can throw at him to see if they can get him the break or not. And through some magic chemistry or whatever by finding the right subject, this guy Ronald Gladden.
They got so lucky that they got this guy.
So lucky with him, with the way his approach to it. All the other actors who surrounded him, who were playing jurors, playing their role, and just the entire creation of a universe of this courtroom that doesn't exist was just enthralling and fascinating. So much so that every episode had its, it's a half-hour reality show, so it has, there are moments that are, it's being done in the faux kind of docu-series kind of manner, but there are high points of like high comedy or very funny stuff. But the fact that the last episode was spent on the reveal and then them showing him how they did it just showed how much there was layering to this show. And it was really something special. It was a real, I think, moment in time for TV in terms of like a concept and then the execution of that concept.
What they did was incredibly hard. And I think people don't necessarily understand it, especially for the actors who basically had to improv 24/7 in these characters.
And they had to keep this guy Ronald convinced that they couldn't get too weird.
Right.
So like one of the things that like as they're in the last episode, as they're explaining it, they said, yeah, you're seeing a couple of minutes of something really crazy that's funny or whatever. And to counterbalance that, and I heard podcast interviews with the creators and the writers, stuff like that. They said they had to build what they call the reality bank, where they would spend 6 hours of legal procedure, boring, being on a jury, legal stuff to convince this guy that what they were watching was real.
And that's all improv. Yeah, I saw Marsden on Colbert say that. He said anytime he got too suspicious, they would do like 4 hours of boring courtroom stuff, and that was difficult. But I mean, the guy who played the juror who was Cyborg, like that guy's a genius.
Yeah, he was great.
Like the people who were improvising this were really good at it, and they weren't big stars. The only one where I thought, and that's because I watched too much TV, where I thought they got too close to the sun was one of the jurors, Kirk Fox. I've seen on several shows.
Was it one of those that guy?
They said they were afraid that he was on Parks and Rec. They're afraid that he'd recognize him.
He was on Parks and Rec. He's also on Reservation Dogs. I was like, no, if I'd been the guy, I would have immediately been like, hey, aren't you on?
Yeah.
But I thought Marsden was terrific. The judge, Alan Barinholtz, who was Ike Barinholtz's dad, was really good. Everyone was really good, and I think I was just really, it was heartwarming and funny, but I just really impressed that they pulled it off because it's so hard. The production team worked really hard. The actors worked really hard, and they just got super lucky that this dude was maybe the nicest person in LA County.
Yep. Yeah.
He was so accepting and so patient with these lunatics around him, and you kept waiting for him to do something horrible, and he just never. The most horrible thing he ever did was just make fun of James Marsden's films to his face. That was it.
Right, it was just great, and Marsden was great too. Marsden was like amazing. Playing a version of himself, and it was just like, it was like, seriously, it's on Amazon's free fast services, Freevee, right? So you can watch it with a couple commercials. Like we watched every episode, including the last episode of the reveal, and we watched the cast commentary over the episodes. That's how enthralled we were by it. Like it was so good.
It was one of the shows of the year in terms of buzz. It was this was a TikTok phenomenon that brought the show into prominence because it was out for a while before it blew up.
Yeah. So good.
So another final season was Billions, probably the most unsung show of the peak TV era, which is now over. This was the final season. This includes several people we've talked about, including Paul Giamatti. Damian Lewis, who was the co-lead, came back. He had left the show after his wife died tragically of cancer. So he'd left the show a couple seasons ago, but he came back this season to take down the new bad guy in the show, played by Corey Stoll. And
he played a bad guy, Corey Stoll?
And this was one of those shows shot in New York, full of great New York actors. And I really loved it. I loved it all the way through. This was one of my favorite shows when it was on. What was really funny, though, was you get to the end, the final episode. It's not really a spoiler to say they figured out a way to make it a happy ending for all the people who are the protagonists. And it's a show about hedge fund people and government people trying to rein them in. And at the end, one group of hedge fund people beats the other group of hedge fund people. And they're all cheering because they just made a ton of money. And I was like, am I supposed to be happy that these psychopaths are now super rich? Like, there's a moment where the confluence of the show's moral arc hit against the reality moral arc. And I was like, I don't think I can feel good about this, even though I like a lot of these characters. But really well done show. The acting was off the charts. When it was Paul Giamatti and Damian Lewis butting heads in sort of this Shakespearean drama, it was just amazing.
Harvey Picard versus Captain Winters.
It really was. It was underrated because it was on Showtime. Not a lot of people have Showtime. It came on during that period where Showtime was starting to get buzz with Homeland and a couple other shows and then sort of died away. But it lasted for seven seasons, I think. And I think they were all really terrific. It was a great love letter to New York as well.
Hijack is a British drama. People get on a plane in, I want to say the Middle East, but no, I don't quite remember. Turkey, something. Among the passengers is Idris Elba, who it turns out is a high-stakes corporate negotiator.
Of course.
There's some very bad people. Then there's not a lot of episodes. I want to say 7, maybe 8.
Is there a hijack?
Yeah, there's a hijack. I thought that was self-explanatory, but there
is
a hijack. It's just a little silly, but played ramrod straight. Great British villains, all the different types of people who you expect on a plane. It's funny how close like something like this can be to an airplane movie. If they had just done it this way a little bit, it'd be very silly. But they did it this way, the other bit, so it's dramatic. And it's funny because at first I was like, I don't know. This might be just a little over the top. And then I'd be like, when's the next one out? And then by the end, I was like, I got to see how it ends. Just, like a little treat. Not too heavy, but it's nice and dramatic. Idris Elba he's good enough to anchor pretty much anything, and it's a British drama, a suspense show, so that's going to have.
Is this like a subgenre of your like disaster movie? And I'm not calling you out. I think I love these movies too. But do you find the same kind of satisfaction as a disaster movie, or there's a villain?
No, this is different because this is people against people, sort of plotting and trying to outsmart each other, and it has to do with the nemesis here. The antagonist is greed to a certain extent. No. Natural disaster, the antagonizing agent is just nature, and nature can't be good or evil. It just is.
I see.
You see.
Idris Elba's kind of a force of nature.
It's true. That's why he's in, what's the one we did with Kate Winslet?
Oh, right. That one,
The Mountain Between Us. There you go.
Something like that.
It's great.
Yeah, that's good.
A plane went down and there were problems with people, but largely they were just against nature and cold.
Quick question that doesn't spoil it. Is it resolved in the first season? Because I didn't get picked up for a second season.
It was resolved. I've honestly thought there wouldn't be a second season. As you know, I don't pay attention.
It's like how I felt with The Gold, where I was like, so how are they doing a second season? Oh, wait, is there another hijack?
Yeah, another plane and be like, oh, man.
I mean, you could very easily do it with an entirely different set of characters. I mean, it would be ridiculous if Idris Elba was on the plane again. But at the same time, I would give a lot for the scene where he realizes he's on a plane that's getting hijacked again. He's like, again?
This should be the flight on the way back from wherever he went the first time.
It should be immediate.
The very next flight he goes on.
All right. Well, then to round this out, like I said, I don't normally go in for reality shows and that sort of thing. But after watching the first season of Welcome to Wrexham, the docuseries reality show that's tracking Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney's purchase of a middling low-tier soccer team, football team in Wales, I dare say, and I don't know if Connor, did you watch the second season?
I watched all of it, yeah.
I dare say the second season is better than the first.
It's interesting because I was a little weary of it. Season 1 was so great because it was as much about the town as the team. And the town was so fascinating and the people you met were so endearing. And they really got to investigate a lot about, the history of the sport and hooliganism and things around soccer and things like that. But then so season 2 starts and it's like the first episode's all about Ryan and Rob's money troubles around the team. It's like, oh no, we're just going to do this for a whole season. But then quickly it found new and interesting things to talk about. I thought season 2 was great. I loved it. Even though I knew the ending, I was very riveted by the whole thing.
Yeah, I stand by. I think season 2 is superior to season 1. I think they improved on the format. They improved on the storytelling mechanism. They tugged at your heart. They really hit a nice rhythm of like spotlight of people in the town, focus on the team, spotlight of people in the town, focus on the team. Like it was a nice kind of balance and it left you wanting more. And ideally, it's just like it's hard not to root for all of them. And it's like I had a hard time rooting for, millionaire actor Ryan Reynolds and all that sort of stuff. But like it gets emotional.
Well, it's not about them. It's about them trying to do this for the town. I mean, they're obviously in big financial trouble because it was cheap to buy the team. It's not cheap to keep running the team.
Right, and all the stuff that goes with it.
And I like they introduced the women's team to the mix, which wasn't in the first season, which was an interesting part of the story.
Yeah, they really grew it in a natural way that made it even more compelling and more of a reason to watch. And so now we just want season 3 to start.
The part that I love that they don't really talk about is, they bought this team and they got one of their writer friends to run it.
Yeah, I love Humphrey Kerr. He's fantastic.
Not just that, but like their co-showrunner's husband.
He's also a working actor, as they mentioned several times.
He auditioned for one of the Star Wars shows during.
Yeah, for Obi-Wan. Yeah,
but I just think like Ron, if like somehow I bought the Mets and I was like, Ron, do you want to run the Mets? Like, what qualifications do you have other than being a Met fan? Like,
he's British.
What I love is that
he would be the only American person you knew if you wanted him to run the Mets.
What I love about his role is that he's also like kind of the de facto, at least in season 2, the de facto narrator, but he also has wild fluctuations in his physical appearance.
Yes, he does.
You know, like long hair, short hair, beard, no beard, you know, like, and it's just like we're watching it. We're just like, and I know how TV is made, and I understand that they film stuff later on to plug in here and stuff like that. But we're just like, we were cracking up about how like the scenes that were happening in real time, he looks completely different from scene to scene. And it's just like, it's really fascinating. But I like him.
One of
like
the things I
Humphrey
really
a lot.
liked about Humphrey is that he gave a point of view that you never see on these shows, is that the celebrities involved in the middle have massive egos and they have to be handled. And there was little bits of that throughout. I was like, and then Ryan spoke and it ruined everything. And I was like, I've worked in television and I know, and it works anywhere where there's an executive or a boss, but it's 10 times more with a celebrity person. And so like to have him say that, I was like, oh wow, they never talk about that stuff. But in the real world, that's a big deal.
Yeah. There was a couple episodes where he's like, and then Ryan texted me, right? And all the texting conversations, and like, because Ryan and Rob are in the States and stuff is good, and they're hearing about it. Like, so it's like, you're right. It definitely pulled back the curtain on how people really are in that scenario, especially on the celebrity level, in a very amusing kind of way.
But you could also tell they were really caring about it beyond the financial aspect.
Oh, yeah,
they
totally,
really did want to win, and did want to win for these guys. And God, man, the episode with the autistic son was
they're brutal.
That was
But there was also the episode where the guy that they had hired to help transition, who just stayed, you know, kind of like
Chris
in the
Niesman?
CEO role, kind of thing. When he took
holiday,
when he went on a vacation, that was very funny, and Humphrey was completely in charge. That was very funny.
Let's take a quick break and talk about, this is our final show of the year. It's always our last show we leave you with for a couple of weeks till we come back in January. And we'd like to take this time to thank everyone who supported iFanboy and our various shows throughout 2023. We put out a lot of shows. It takes a lot of work, a lot of people, a lot of time away from our families, a lot of expense. And we could not do all those things and make it worth it without you, the supporters, and especially our patrons at patreon.com/iFanboy. You are direct supporters. You've unlocked several shows that everyone gets to enjoy, all the Splode shows, including our Media Splode. And hopefully we make it worth your while. There's a Discord community, there's a Facebook community, there's a monthly patron hangout, there's the patron pick you get to vote on for our pick of the week show. There's all kinds of fun things you get to do, hopefully, that are fun, and hopefully make it worth it beyond just supporting the show, which hopefully is the primary thing you become a patron for. We introduced the tier exclusive merchandise this year, which means if you become a patron and you're a patron for 3 months at whatever tier you're at, you get that tier's merchandise sent directly to you. You can jump around tiers to get all the merchandise if you want. It goes for everything from stickers at the bottom to really nice hoodies at the top. People really like those. We've been seeing photos of people wearing the shirts and they really like them, and we don't even have them. That's the irony of this. We don't even have our own exclusive merchandise, which we would like, but we don't have it. That's just the way it goes. Only the patrons get it. That's how exclusive it is. So thanks to all the patrons throughout the year. We appreciate everyone who's supported us. And there's all kinds of ways. If you don't want to be a patron, you can go to ifanboy.threadless.com. We have our t-shirts there. There's still some time for the holidays. If you want to get your grandma a Nothing Makes Sense, Nothing Matters t-shirt, you can do that at ifanboy.threadless.com.
What is this nihilistic shirt, dear?
Exactly. Get it for your entire family. They'll wear them during the holiday dinner. ifanboy.com/support is our digital tip jar. And if you want to throw a couple bucks in at the end of the year and don't want to be a patron, that'd be great. If you are a unhinged billionaire and you want to toss a couple of $1 million into the tip jar, we'll figure it out. It'll cause a headache. We'll figure it out.
I feel like people don't believe us about that.
No, we'll definitely do it.
I think that they're thinking, listen, I can't.
It's not a bit.
Like, they're saying like they'll take care of it, but I think it's going to be too much for them, and I want to spare them that hassle. And Connor and I, we've been here telling you, we will handle it.
We appreciate the concern. We'll handle
absolutely appreciate it. But at the same time, give us that money. Right.
I mean, if you want to drop $100, $200 million into the PayPal, we'll figure it out.
If we're talking, I mean, a paltry 6 figures. We're going to make that work too. That's what we do. We make free money work.
We'll make change out of that PayPal donation.
You want to give us $150,000? That works. If you want to give us $647,000, that's fine too.
Right. If you want to send it all in pennies or nickels, we'll send you an address.
If you want to do $15 billion, we're going to make that work. That's what we do.
There'll be a lot of frantic phone calls and emails, but it'll eventually work itself out.
I mean, the show will start coming from a boat. I don't think there's any way around that. iFanboy.com/Amazon. Welcome to iFanboy Pick the Week podcast featuring Martin Scorsese.
Right.
I don't know why you're making me read these things.
If you're listening to the show as it's coming out, there's still a week to go till Christmas. So if you wanted to get any last minute holiday shopping done, ifanboy.com/Amazon, you can find a general shopping link right there on that page, as well as all of our Booksplode books. You can check those out. If you've listened to those shows and want to check those books out, you can buy those books via those links. And then bookshop.org is our partner that helps support local bookstores. You can also find those links on the Booksplode shows as well. And again, we thank everyone who has supported us throughout the year, throughout this year, any year. We say it all the time, but it's absolutely true. We wouldn't be here without you, and thank you very much. Let's move on to music.
All right. The hard balance, at least for me, definitely for me, Josh, probably a little bit for you with music, is balancing the nostalgia versus the new and the more current kind of things. Because, facing facts, we're getting older, and a lot of the bands that I was into when I was a teenager, for better or for worse, have come back or are still around and are playing out. And I was at a show recently with some friends, and we were talking about this phenomenon, and I was saying, I'm in full support of all, these guys in their 50s now, playing out and doing releases and repackaging and stuff like that of their previous releases, and playing festivals and doing these tours, because cash in, because they weren't making money in their 20s when they were doing it the first time, right? So now that we're all a little older, we have a little more disposable income. Sure, make some money off of it. And this year was kind of a banner year for one specific musician who's probably on my Mount Rushmore of music, kind of gods, and that is Walter Schreifels, who originally was in Gorilla Biscuits and Youth of Today in the 1980s in the New York hardcore scene, and then helped define post-hardcore with Quicksand in the early 90s, and then had a successful third act in the late 90s, early 2000s with Rival Schools. Well, this year was a big year for Walter because it was the 30th anniversary of Quicksand's first record, Slip. Rival Schools reunited and toured. Quicksand also toured in celebration of Slip, and Gorilla Biscuits just played a bunch this summer, right? So he was very, very busy. And that together put in one large package gave us a beautiful 30th anniversary edition of Slip vinyl release. The folks at Iodine Records outdid themselves. They did a, kind of a standard, just, re-release of the album on color vinyl, with a remaster, doing the whole thing. But then there was the deluxe edition that came with a nice inch thick book with photos and flyers and writing from people who were there at the time and people who worked on it and all that sort of stuff. And it really became just like a great, actually Walter referred to it as an heirloom, he's like, hey, you guys put together this thing that documented this amazing thing that we did. And it's, has a proud spot on my bookshelf. Rival Schools did a similar approach with a different record label. Run for Cover Records did it, where they did a deluxe edition of their first record, United by Fate, with photos and stories and all that sort of stuff. And just really this new kind of deluxe book edition with vinyl kind of is like a new way that I really like, and I wish more bands I enjoyed did, because it's just like this beautiful way to celebrate this record that's standing the test of time. And then just the fact that was able to see all three of Walter's bands, Quicksand, Rival Schools, and Gorilla Biscuits, live, not once, but multiple times this year. Josh, you and I got together in New York City to see Rival Schools over the summer. I saw them twice on that tour. I saw Quicksand, I think 3 times this year. I saw Gorilla Biscuits 3 or 4 times this year. It was just a lot of fun. So, it is one thing to, kind of, I don't want to say we're stuck in the past, but we're celebrating the past, and we're celebrating these songs that we love, that we grew up with. This year was pretty special in that regard.
I don't know that I have trouble with old versus new, because I don't think I bother with new unless I find something, but that doesn't ever happen. What's funny is I always think of the last new band was when you were like, you should check out this band Cloud Nothings. And that was 9 years ago. But, So that's how that happens. I just try to find anything that makes me happy, basically, that I want to keep listening to. And a lot of that has been Walter Schreifel's music this year. So that's been a thing. Oh God, I actually really hate how predictable this is to me. But Jay Mascis of Dinosaur Jr., he has this other he has many side projects. He's involved in a lot of things. This guy loves to play music, but he has a side project called Heavy Blanket, who Ron and I actually saw perform live. They opened for My Bloody Valentine. It's a instrumental thing. There's some weird fake concocted story about some old friends they got together. I'm pretty sure it's just him. A lot of years ago, I want to say it was 2012, they released the first Heavy Blanket album, and it basically sounds like stoner doom riffs. It sounds like instrumental Black Sabbath. It's kind of what it is before. And I listened to it quite a bit, and I always really enjoyed it. It's a great thing to sort of put on backgroundy, and Jay Mascis will just noodle around, and he's got a great sense of melody, and it's really fun. This album comes out, and I thought, oh cool, that'll be a new one. And I found myself listening to it over and over and over again. There's no vocals again, but it's no longer a Black Sabbath kind of thing. It's almost like a poppy psychedelic thing. And I know that you'll be like, oh, well, Dinosaur Jr. sounds like that. And that's what he doesn't sound like Dinosaur Jr. in it. It's a really fun, catchy, instrumental, sort of almost like a jammy kind of thing. And I listened to it a lot. originally, and then I kind of forgot about it. And then like a month or so ago, I was like, all right, this. And I started listening to it again. I was like, this is great. I'd listened to it when I was reading comics for a while. The last couple of years, I've been listening to jazz while I read comics, if I have to like shut out other noises. But I kept going back to this, and it made me really happy. So I don't know if any of that sounds like something you would want, or you're even marginally intrigued by it. Pull this up on your streaming system or whatever. You know, like you don't get a lot of instrumental rock that is worth a damn that doesn't sound like bad jammy stuff. It's good jammy stuff, I suppose. That's one of my favorite albums this year.
So going back to balancing the new and the old or whatnot, me and my friend Scott were driving to a show. We were going to see Bob Mould play his solo electric, and Scott was driving and he was just playing stuff, you know, off his phone in the car. And you ever have one of those moments where you're just like, you're talking to something and the song's on the background and the song is breaking through the conversation to the point where you have to be like, hold on, what is this? Well, so that's what happened when I heard Sincere Engineer, which is a punk band that originates out of Chicago. It's pretty much the project or the focus project of a woman by the name of Deanna Bellos. She started in 2015 as kind of her own solo project. They just came out with a new record called Cheap Grills, and it's great. It's got energy. It's got vitality. It falls in the punk category, but like she opened for the Hold Steady at the Hold Steady does all those shows, and every year they do kind of a residency in Brooklyn over like a week. And one of the nights she opened for them, right? So it's not rancid, you know, kind of Liberty Spike punk, but the kind of more indie punk in that kind of way. But it's just a song called Landline, which is just that's the song that broke through. Where I was like, who is this? This is great, and it's just a lot of fun. And like I haven't seen them play live yet. I'm excited to. I'm hoping they're going to tour. I know they're doing a bunch of shows in the Midwest to celebrate the record release. There's a record release show in Chicago right before Christmas. But the first chance I get to go see them live, I really want to. The album is called Cheap Grills. The band is Sincere Engineer. I strongly recommend it. It's just fun electricity, indie punk. Definitely recommend. And also in regards of new music, there is a Long Island hardcore band named Koyo who have been rising the ranks over the past couple of years. And they're kind of like, at this point, probably the biggest current newish Long Island hardcore band coming out of it. They just came out with a new record called Would You Miss It? Their first full length. One of the great things, and Josh, I think you'll appreciate this, and maybe you too, Connor, one of the great aspects of Koyo is that you could look at the guys in the band and any individual one of them also could work in a pizza place on Long Island.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they look like. They just look like Vinny from the pizza place, right? But
Excellent.
Their album, Do You Miss It? It's a banger. Every song is great. They're a blast live. They had 2 record release shows, kind of celebration shows here on Long Island. I went to the first one and it was just like elbow to elbow packed with kids, young and old, just like continuing the legacy of Long Island hardcore into the future, which is something I'm really happy to see. Koyo is just great. So I strongly recommend it.
I should have mentioned The Sleeping. Just to get off that Long Island thing, as I saw The Sleeping open for the Shins, and they were a Long Island hardcore band that I'd never heard of. They put on a great show, and I love their album that came out this year. I just slipped one in. There it is.
Let's talk about slipping one in. A band I discovered just like 2 weeks ago. This band called Milspec put out a record called Marathon, which again was another situation where like 30 seconds into the first song, you're like, oh, this is good, right? So Milspec is, they're based out of Toronto, so a Canadian band. Been around for a while. They've got a bunch of releases, but they're full-length Marathon. Just 10 solid songs of like good melodic hardcore, you know, very, you know, in the Dag Nasty kind of column of like fun hardcore to sing along to. One of the challenges I've had with recent years of hardcore is that hardcore exists on the spectrum where one end is a metal influence, another end is a melodic influence, and I lean more towards the melodic. Milspec definitely kind of checked that box for me. That was a pleasant surprise and a record I've been enjoying more towards the end of the year.
The thing that Ron and I probably talked about the most in a post-Riot Fest world was Tim, the Let It Be edition from The Replacements. Basically, this is
the Let It Bleed.
I should let it be, didn't I? Listen, they also have a song called Let It Be. It's an album called Let It Be, actually, which is a better album than Tim. And what this is they went and they took Tim, which was the first major label album from The Replacements, at a time where going from indie to major label was like a really big deal that is a controversy that doesn't even exist anymore in any meaningful way, which we'll just let that go. And the album itself is excellent, but it suffers very much of sounding as if it is from the time. And also mixed with the fact that The Replacements were hellbent on not sounding good or doing a good job at any point, almost in opposition to their talent.
Talk about
the most self-destructive band ever. That is what's fascinating about them, is that every chance they had, they blew on purpose. And, you know, you read that book, The Trouble Boys or whatever, you don't have to be a fan of the music as much as to just like sort of keep reading their hubris and be like, why do you keep sabotaging yourselves? And it is fascinating. Anyway, getting back around, that's how I got interested in The Replacements, by the way, that specific psychosis that they seem to have. But anyway, the album doesn't sound awesome. today. It sounds very much of the time for much of my life and Ron's life. We're all the same age. Music was produced poorly. Music sounded really good in the 60s and 70s. And then in the 80s and 90s, they were like, we got all this new stuff. And they made it sound worse. Lots of reverb that didn't need to be there, chorus, all sorts of stuff. And what the producer here was take that album and make it sound like a great recording, a timeless great recording. And you see these songs that are great songs absolutely come alive in a timeless manner. And it's great for that. It's great to hear Bastards of Young not sound like it is from the mid 80s, but instead 84? 85? I forget. But
No,
to just
later.
sound like it's a great album. But not only that, but what this represents is I don't necessarily want them to go through, but there are a lot of wonderful albums that if they could make them sound as if they were being recorded today, by Steve Albini or by who, just to sort of let the songs shine and take out what were ultimately bad production ideas. They'd be amazing.
Well, yeah. What got me about this is that listening to it just sounds like a completely different record. Like it just like you hear stuff that was in the recording that was so buried in the mix that you didn't know was there before, right? It felt so much more alive and
real. I won't lie. If they do this to Zen Arcade by Husker Du, I couldn't be happier.
Yeah, I don't know if they would though.
And that's all fair, but I think that would lend so much to. I don't know if it makes it more accessible, but like if it feels like this sounds like it should. This is like the Giles Martin remixes on the Beatles albums. It's hard to be upset with them because what they did was they got rid of the garbage sound and then pulled all the things forward that you were supposed to hear from the beginning. Anyways, it's really fascinating. It's one of those things where I heard about it, people asked about it, and I thought I'll get to it, and I thought it can't live up to what people are saying. People always exaggerate this stuff, and it was even better than I would have imagined. Huge thing.
Yeah, mind-blowing. And then lastly, probably my show of the year, I would have to give it to, I drove down to Washington, D.C. to go to a show, part of a festival called Reunion Summer. And it was some folks in DC who were putting on a whole bunch of shows and events and things like that. And I went down for the Saturday night show, the second show of it, to see at St. Stephen's Church in Washington, D.C., which folks might recognize. There's some old video of Fugazi playing there in like 1988 or 89. It's this nice little church in the north part of D.C. that has a community room that the D.C. punk scene did shows at for years and years and years. And this was a fundraiser for the church because I guess they're going under hard times and that sort of thing. And so as part of the theme of it, it was reunions. And so two classic bands from the 90s that I never got to see live back in the day. One band called Samuel that was at State College, Pennsylvania, that had a woman singer and was kind of in the emo world. They did a split 7-inch with Texas Is the Reason. So that could kind of give you a sense of where they existed in the scene. They reunited and played a set and were fantastic. But then Lincoln, who was probably the closest to a mythic band that none of my friends got to see. They were out of West Virginia and played in the very early 90s, like 93, 94, and then broke up. They had one song on a split 7-inch with another band called Hoover. It was the Lincoln Hoover split. That is a split 7-inch that so many of us growing up in the 90s in the hardcore scene just held up as just like the pinnacle of like the perfect split 7-inch. And like both bands were complementary but unique and yada yada. And Lincoln was just this mystery to all of us because they had dropped that split 7-inch and like I think two other 7-inches, and that was it. And then we're gone. And we all listened to it religiously and never thought we'd ever get to see them again. But sure enough, here we are. No band breaks up. Every band gets back together. Lincoln reunited to play these shows. And it blew the doors off the place. It was just fantastic. It totally paid off. And it was a nice, kind of like closing the loop on, trying to cross bands on the list, like say, being able to see, okay, I saw them. These are two bands that I had written off that I never thought I would get to see. And here we are in 2023, all much, much older. And, I think the show was done by 10 o'clock, which was fantastic. So we can all get home and get a good night's sleep. Yeah. It was worth the train ride down to DC to be at. I actually ran into people I knew from back in the day in the 90s from the scene who remembered my zine and all that sort of stuff. So it was a really great kind of experience to go through. And both bands were awesome. Samuel and Lincoln are now actively playing shows. Samuel did some tour dates. Samuel, they had a new record. They got back together and were rehearsing and then wrote new music. And so they put out a new record, and they also put out a record that collected all of their stuff from the 90s all onto one release. And I strongly recommend them as well. They now go by Samuel SC for State College because I guess there was some copyright conflict with another band called Samuel or something. But yeah, both were fantastic. And it was just like, never thought I'd get to see them, and I did. So I'm very happy about that.
All right. So last year we didn't talk about podcasts. We talked about games. This year we're swapping it and talking about podcasts and not games. And let's start it off, Josh.
For me, I think Strike Force 5, the Colbert, Fallon, Kimmel, Myers, and John Oliver podcast that took place during the strike, name's actually kind of brilliant when you put it together that way, was one of my favorite things not favorite podcasts. One of my favorite things to listen to 4 brilliant people and Jimmy Fallon riff off. I'm overselling it
You
a
did that
little
joke
bit.
on the media split.
Did I? I'm still not sure if he's really dumb or not. It was the mystery of the whole thing. I know that he wasn't up to speed. Anyway, it's not the point. To listen to those guys riff with each other and listen to the way that their different comedy minds work. And I'm 100% a David Brent when it comes to comedy, is that I consider myself a non-existent or failed comedian, but I love the mechanics of it. And so to listen to the way that these different people tell jokes with each other and for each other was a fantastic time. It was laugh out loud funny almost all the way through every episode, and the fact that it had to end upset me. But then, in fact, the fact that it even was able to exist is amazing. At no point in history would this exist.
Right.
You know, where, you know,
couldn't.
That's true. But also, like, in the 80s, 90s, these people were rightly or not rivals to each other. They didn't interact publicly. That was not the story. The networks would have never allowed it. But here we live in a different world, and they're comedians who respect what each other do. There was bits where they forgot that they were on a podcast in a way, and, you know, they were talking about people and fucking naming names, you know, like Jim Belushi, not well regarded in this group.
Nope.
Just little things like that that made it feel like it wasn't a show as much as it was a conversation between people whose job is to make jokes.
It was very, very funny, but one of the things I liked about it the best was that only really, in America at least, these 5 guys or so can have these conversations because they're the only ones who really know what it takes to do those shows. And so
I liked that too.
Even just the conversations in the beginning, more so, they had a couple of shows where they just talked about the mechanics of their show or stories behind their show, and only they can really commiserate. Those are the conversations I really found fascinating, where, like, what do you guys think when this happens? Or has this ever happened to you where you do this? That's interesting to me. You know, from everything I've ever read about or heard about doing these shows, you're living in this bubble that you can't get out of forever
all the time.
You're in it. And so you don't get this, as they get to talk about it that much.
Right.
With the people that could understand what they're going
through. Can you
through.
imagine how therapeutic that must have been for these guys to be able to do it all together with them? And, like, we got to sit in on it. And, like, I don't watch most of these shows. I just, like, I don't care about celebrity interviews or whatever. But being able to see, you know, people who, I don't think John Oliver should have been there genre-wise, but whatever, he's brilliant. You know, I didn't know what it was until, like, Connor, you sort of mentioned it as if I did know. And I was like, oh, yeah. And then, you know, my wife just mainlined them. She's like, you have to listen to them. And it's one of those things where, you know, I'll take a laugh any day of the week, and I'm out there walking my dog and fucking laughing. And then by the time you get to the last couple episodes, I knew that was it. And so I had to, like, save them. I was like, nope, I gotta wait.
I finally just listened to the final one a week ago.
Oh, it was delightful.
I was driving home and I was like, I was stuck in traffic, and I knew I was going to be there at least an hour. And I was like, oh, fuck it, it's time. And so I did it. It was good. The Dave episode was terrific. The Jon Stewart episode was terrific. The big heartbreak is that apparently Colbert screwed up. He was supposed to invite Conan. Conan didn't get to come on, which is sort of on brand for Conan. And so I wanted to mention Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend. It's a podcast that I don't listen to / watch every episode. It really depends on who the guests are. Even though I think Conan and his co-hosts, Sonamaf Sessian, and our old podcasting pal, Matt Gorley, are very funny. There's just so much to do in the world that I only really check in when I see it's just someone I really like he's got on it. But he had a ton of guests this year.
It's like the approach of Marin. Like, I only listen to Marin when it's somebody who I actually want to hear. Yeah.
I know if I'll listen to a random episode, it'll be funny, but I just don't have time to listen to them all.
Yeah.
The first episode this year, I think, was Timothy Olyphant's return. And for a guy that handsome, he shouldn't be that funny. Like, it's not fair. He is as weird and funny as Conan is. And, you know, you had Jim Downey come on this year. And
that was massive.
If you're our age, that was an incredible episode. Jim Downey being one of the all-time great SNL writers, talking about all these classic sketches that they worked on. Conan's very, very, very funny. And he's very, very, very fast. And it just bums me out. He would have been so good on Strike Force 5. But he has his regulars like John Mulaney, who's very funny when he comes on. And again, people he can talk to or talk to him that only have these conversations with him. Oh, Harrison Ford. Have you ever heard Harrison Ford on a podcast? He did Conan's show. It was fucking weird and awesome.
That's great.
So, like, he gets these interesting guests, and he's really interested in what they have to say. He's really funny. He's really nice. And from everything I've heard here in town, he is legitimately, genuinely that nice in real life. It's still a very, very funny show when I check in on it.
One podcast that I started listening to this year was actually one that was on Connor's list last year that we didn't talk about. My podcast listening has gone way down because of, you know, lack of commute and all that sort of stuff.
When you run, do you listen to podcasts or do you listen to music?
Yeah, no, I do, but I run enough to listen to the podcast I was already
Sure.
listening to. So I wasn't really expanding what I was listening to that much, but I started going into the city more often for work and had a little more time. So I expanded a little over the summer. And so therefore I don't listen to the Conan show. I don't listen to any of the Ringer shows or anything like that. But Connor and a couple other people I know had recommended The Town with Matt Belloni, which is a joint production from the Puck Media news site and the Ringer. And it's basically just a half hour, 2 or 3 episodes a week covering entertainment business, in the town, referring to LA and Hollywood and that sort of thing. It's fun and insightful to listen to. It's covering the current events of what's happening in the entertainment industry with a perspective from Belloni, who was a lawyer. I believe he was a lawyer, right?
He was a lawyer, then he became the editor of The Hollywood Reporter with Kim Masters, and he did that for forever, and then he left that to do Puck.
I've told you guys that Kim Masters was the wife of a friend of mine who I used to work with, and I'd go play music with him, and she didn't like me.
Not surprising.
A lot of really, really good insight, safe to say, with the strike, with everything that's going on with the earnings and layoffs and all that fun stuff that's going on in the entertainment industry being turned upside down this year. It's just been a really compelling and interesting podcast to listen to. Get some really great guests on for interviews and for good conversations. And it's just it's a nice way to, augment the scrolling through news headlines on Deadline and Hollywood Reporter and stuff like that to get a little more insight and commentary to what's going on in entertainment. So I really, really enjoy it.
My 2 quick thoughts is one, in the past on the show, we've talked about The Business, which is Kim Masters' once a week podcast about Hollywood, and The Town has rendered The Business irrelevant. Anything they talk about on Friday on The Business, he's already done a half an hour on The Town, and he comes on as her co-host to talk the first 6 minutes about the news of the day, but it's always something he's already done a half an hour on. So by the time I listen to it, it's like, you're giving me the bullet points here, and I've already heard about this. So he's sort of rendered his old boss's show irrelevant. Second of all, it's, from what I can tell, from what people I've talked to, it's like a must listen if you're in any way involved in the entertainment business.
Yeah.
I mean, Ron and I'm in video games, Ron's in digital media. We're not in TV and film, but we're in the entertainment business in our different ways. And you got to listen to it. It's just, it keeps its finger on the pulse of what's important in the industry right now.
Very well done, and and gets good guests on, and it's always worth listening to.
Yeah, even if he has dumb opinions, he usually has terrible creative thoughts, and his producer is like a stereotype millennial dude. But I listen to every episode, even if I'm not super interested in the topic.
Yep, same here. Because it's short enough. Yeah. Like coming in at 28 minutes, 29 minutes, 32 minutes. Yeah, it's the right length and gets the information across. And I really, really enjoy it.
Similarly, there's a show called Pivot, which is on the Vox Media Network, hosted by Kara Swisher and Scott Galloway, 2 extremely rich egomaniacs who I probably wouldn't like in real life, but it's a show that comes on twice a week. It's on Tuesdays and Fridays, I think, and they cover media, politics, tech, and business news. Each episode's an hour. So between those 2 shows, I get a really good overview of the main issues of the day. Obviously, they've been doing a lot in AI lately. Kara Swisher is a tech reporter. Scott Galloway is a business professor and business owner. They have 2 very different points of view, but they always have very interesting conversations. And there's usually a guest interview. They've done a couple of really interesting shows lately. They just did one as we're recording this about the state of local news and media and stuff like that. So I always find it's a good overview of what's happening, what's important in tech, business, politics, etc. And even though they both are completely out of touch with reality because they're both really wealthy, they have good...
Yeah, Kara Swisher is not... Yeah, she's...
Yeah, no, I know. Trust me. But the conversations are interesting. And you don't have to like hosts to enjoy the show. Like, I listened to Mike and the Mad Dog for 10 years.
I can understand falling asleep on Mike right now, by the way. I get it.
It's a good overview of what's going on in those buckets. And I think, Ron, you might find some use and value in it. Yeah. They do talk a lot about the tech industry.
Yeah, because Kara's been, I've been reading her since the early 2000s, yeah.
She's a little bit too much fealty to tech people, and he has a little too much fealty to business people. But that's the thing that really gets me. Other than that, they have good thoughts, even if they don't realize how out of touch they are with reality. But that's fine.
Nice.
Again, I've mentioned this before, but one of my favorite shows of the year was Death on the Lot from Adam McKay and his team of very talented producers, I believe. He had previously done Death at the Wing, which was really one of the things after The Last Dance that got me into watching basketball again. Whereas that, he had taken basketball players in the 80s who died, NBA players, specifically wing players, and then sort of laid them on as a parallel to how the policies of Reagan's presidency destroyed working class and urban America, which that sounds fun to everybody, right? That's a good time. In this series, Death on the Lot, it's a very similar approach, but it has to do with sort of Hollywood deaths and how those are part of what happened as part of the sort of HUAC and the political systems of the Cold War and how that negatively affected life. It sounds like that wouldn't make any sense, but it really is done incredibly deftly. I'd say the high point of the season, and I think it's the last episode of this last season, was the story of the making of Genghis Khan, or Genghis Khan, John Wayne film that was filmed in the desert, not really far from where nuclear testing was done, and how absolutely horrible and terrible that location was, and how no one kind of cared about it. And that was juxtaposed against the reputation that John Wayne has versus what he was actually like. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, and I can't, who the leading, like, so many people died following that, over the years later of having cancer because basically they were in a radioactive fallout zone.
Yeah. They don't know if that's the case, though. That's like the urban legend.
No, it is. But the way it's presented here is there's an awful lot of correlation, not causation, but it makes a lot of sense. And when you sort of hear all those stories.
Well, they also all smoke 25 packs of cigarettes a day.
Yeah, but there's different kinds of cancer.
Sure.
When we think about Adam McKay, many of us will go, oh, right, he made the funny movies. And obviously since...
Does he?
Yes.
Not anymore.
No, I know. Well, no, that's not true. The movies are still funny. They're just so fucking sad at the same time. But it's definitely not like he's not a comedy director anymore. And you could see that. It's funny because if you watch the Mark Wahlberg, Will Ferrell one, The Other Guys, and I think that, I don't know if that was his first sort of political, like it was a funny movie on the surface, but underneath it, it's all about rich getting richer and poor getting poorer, mortgage, fraud, stuff like that. Steve Coogan is the villain in that. Anyway, the point is he's still funny, but the funny doesn't overshadow the serious, or at least just the really interesting stories.
I listened to the first episode, if you've mentioned it, and I enjoyed it, but I just get lost in all the. I don't have time without a commute.
There's a good George Reeves episode about the death of that sort of.
Is he narrating
Superman
all
character.
of them?
Yeah, he does.
He has that voice problem.
Yeah, he has a tremor.
Yeah.
I looked it up. I was like, what's going on with his voice? And I actually really liked that he kept doing it. Like he was like, well, this is what I sound like. This is how I'm going to do it. I love that show. He has the ability to put resources into it. And so, so much history podcasts and story, or, just people sitting around who are talking and read stuff off of Wikipedia is not good. But, I felt like it had journalistic standards, but it was done in sort of an oral storytelling style. Loved it.
Are almost all these shows from networks?
That one is on, it was on one of them, I think. Yeah.
Look at us playing into the podcasting narrative.
Yeah.
Listen, we're all guilty of it. Plain English with Derek Thompson's on the Ringer Network. That's another show that comes out twice a week that I don't listen to every episode. It really depends on the subject, but he is a writer from The Atlantic who, does an hour or so on a topic. Sometimes it's topical, sometimes it's evergreen. He did a really great series on the history of Israel and Palestine after, obviously, the war started. Several episodes in a row from various points of view with various guests of various political and ethnic backgrounds. And it really gave you a really interesting overview from various sides of that conflict. I don't always, there was one episode about, what is happiness? I was like, I don't care. And I turned it off. So, if it's an interesting topic to me, I think he does a really good job of doing a good look at the subject and gets an expert to come on and talk about it. And he's very curious, smart, and it's worth it. Again, if it pops up, you're like, oh, that's an interesting topic I want to know more about. It's usually going to bring you some sort of knowledge you didn't have before.
So I went from last year and before that listening to 0 podcasts on the Ringer Network to now listening to 2, because in addition to The Town, I started listening to The Watch, which is a podcast with Chris Ryan and Andy Greenwald, which is essentially our Media Explode show. It's just two friends talking about what they're watching on TV, right?
Yeah.
I happen to know Andy Greenwald. I've known him for a long time. He interviewed me. He wrote a book on emo in the early 2000s, and I was interviewed in that book. If you go look it up, it's called Nothing Feels Good. And since then have, marginally stayed in touch and that sort of thing. And knew he's been doing this podcast. And, he wrote for Grantland and was part of that whole kind of orbit around Simmons and that whole grouping. But I honestly can't tell you what made me start listening to it. I mean, it's like us, they've been doing it for many, I think they're their 600th episode or something like that. They do 2 episodes a week, but there was some moment in time where I was like, oh, I'm going to listen to this, and actually ended up enjoying it. I knew nothing about Chris Ryan, and turns out that he's, also into hardcore and into some similar music and that sort of thing. And so they have a good rapport. It's it made me laugh because I'm like, oh, this is what it must feel like for everybody listening to iFanboy, right? So, but they've had some good conversations about TV and the stuff that's that's on and active in production, on a weekly kind of what they're watching and critique of episodes and things like that. There was I don't remember the moment that made me start listening to it, but I started listening to it and haven't stopped since.
I'm going to pull an audible.
Uh-oh.
I was going to talk about Lost Hills, The Dark Prince, which is a Pushkin, a Malcolm Gladwell thing, and it's this whole story about the surfer Mickey Dora and the history of surfing in America, and you should listen to it. It's fine. But I'm going to talk about The Old Man and the Three with J.J. Redick and his co-host Tommy Alter. Redick was an NBA player, sharpshooter, specialist. He retired a couple of years ago. He would say he was the first guy. I think Richard Jefferson would say he was the first guy to have a podcast while he was still a professional NBA player.
Which is super common now.
Yes, but he was, I mean, I think you'd say he was the sort of first one. But
Trailblazer.
I don't think it's Amazon, but he's on Amazon. So whatever Amazon's podcast thing is, where it is. And he does long-form interviews of NBA players. There's other things to it. There's shows in the middle which are more analysis, and he has really smart people come on. Athlete interviews are not always awesome, but he's a wonderful interviewer. Like, it's kind of shocking. I've had people say, I've heard the phrase, like, God doesn't give with both hands. And JJ Redick is quite handsome. He was a pretty good basketball player and had a whole career, but he's a really good interviewer. And you might hear him on ESPN calling games sometimes. He's so boring in that role, but he asks wonderful questions. He has conversations. He, can relate to his subjects. I've been so surprised to sort of listen to long form interviews with other athletes and stuff that he's done, and sort of a basketball mind that's very, very interesting. Some of the analytical shows that he does in the middle, Tim Legler, another former player, and Richard Jefferson, are really great to sort of have a different perspective on NBA games. But largely, like, the thing that I kept coming out of it is like, he's a really intelligent, he's a good listener, and he knows how to ask questions. And again, when we talk about, the way that I want to do interviews is I want to find out about those people and where they come from and what makes them tick, not necessarily, basketball questions. And I think that he's really wonderful at that. It's incredibly impressive. And I actually listen to it, not every single episode, but very frequently. It's a great thing to throw on.
Who's the old man in the scenario?
He is.
He's both?
He's the old man and the three. Which, by the way, the fucking title is a Hemingway reference.
Yeah. Well, didn't he go to Duke?
He did go to Duke, and he went all 4 years. And at one point, he actually started paying attention to his classes.
How impressed are you that I knew he went to Duke?
I guess impressed, but I'm not all that surprised. You know things like that.
Finally, I want to talk about a show that Josh mentioned on one of our Media Explode shows called The Set. This is it's not true crime. Well, I guess it is a true crime podcast, but it's not that kind of true crime podcast. It's a look back on...
Kind of a documentary.
It's more of a documentary. Early 90s crack-fueled, crime-ridden New York City, focusing on the 3-0 precinct, which was incredibly corrupt. There's a documentary about it. This has been covered extensively, but this was a really compelling multi-episode deep dive into how it became so corrupt, what it meant to have that corruption, and then how they got out of it, maybe. Mm-hmm. I just want to say that the title was terrible. The Set is a reference to something on the show, but it's just not a good title. I don't know.
It makes it seem like it's going to be more broad than it is, and I think it stops people from hearing it.
It's just a bad title. The Set refers to when they're doing like an undercover sting, the fake location they sort of set up, and they call them like it's like a movie set, The Set. And it's just dumb. Mm-hmm. Anyway, what was great about this show?
Several things.
It was a great look, and I mean, I lived through that era. I remember it happening. I remember Michael Dowd. I remember him being on the cover of the New York Daily News. But the New York characters on this show were unparalleled.
I several times had to check that those were not reenacting actors. I thought there's no way that all of these people sound so much like central casting New York cops because of the way they were talking and the sounds of their voices. And in fact, the stories sounded fake. And I had to keep reminding myself that these are, by the way, also fantastic production in terms of getting first person interviews on tape.
Zach Levitt was the host. He got really incredible access, including to many of the cops who were on the take and the criminals they were working with.
God. That one guy.
It ends up being a very heartbreaking story, not just because of the corruption, but because some very well-meaning and courageous people tried to put an end to it, and politics got in the way, and egos got in the way. And they did a good job of cleaning it up, and you can argue about how clean it actually got. But then there was the one guy who worked for the prosecutor who was he an ex-cop? I think he was.
I know
he
who
was
you mean.
Like
The one, yeah.
He was like kind of the hero of the story, and he just got his legs taken out from him at the end, trying to do the right thing. And it was just incredibly frustrating. But it was a really compelling listen. You don't have to have been a New Yorker like me at the time to enjoy it. Josh certainly wasn't, and he enjoyed it. Really great story, really compelling story about corruption, the nature of corruption, how easy it is to become a corrupt cop. These guys don't enter the academy with the intention of becoming a corrupt cop. It just sort of happens. And it was an interesting look at that. There's a couple of guys at the beginning you think, oh, that's the good cop, and nope. And so really fascinating how murky and gray and no easy answers there are to these problems.
The nature of those stories, you think that can't be true. So often, like the things that the cops did, it's a lot like, oh Christ, the David Simon show that he just did.
The Deuce?
No, the street, we
own
this city. That's right. Yeah, and you're like, oh, cops would, and it was so bad. You won't believe it, but it's true.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah, it was a very good show.
Absolutely.
All right, let's turn to books. We love books. We love to read. We love reading comics. We love reading prose. We love reading all kinds of books. I've been in love with this Thursday Murder Club mystery series. I think it's the 4th or 5th book I'm talking about here, The Last Devil to Die by Richard Osman, who is a former British TV writer and presenter who quit his job on TV to become a full-time novelist because his books really got popular. The general premise of these books is it takes place in a retirement home in rural England, and these adorable retired British people in their 70s solve murders, one of whom it helps is a former MI6 spy. Besides the fact that it's incredibly funny, besides the fact that he's such a gift for language and voice and character, and everyone is really delightful to be around, this book was really something because it dealt with some really heavy issues, and it did it in a really deft way. One of them, not the main characters, but one of the main characters is, I don't want to spoil this. One of the main characters is, secondary character has had Alzheimer's this entire time, these 4 books, and this is that book where it finally comes to a head. And we hadn't really dealt with that kind of thing in this book yet, even though these are people surrounded by really old people who die. We've had other people die in the book just from being old. This was really rough and emotional, but it was handled in a way that didn't overpower the book. It didn't drag it down. It made sense for the characters, and it really gave it a depth that hadn't been there before in the other books, and it's really terrific. The books are great. If you love a sort of murder mystery with heart and humor, I can't recommend Thursday Murder Club books enough, but this most recent one, The Last Devil to Die, was really, really well done. He started off out the gate a great writer, but he's getting really, really good now.
You were going to notice a specific theme to my obsessive reading this year. And I'm going to start with The Wager, A Tale of Shipwreck, Mutiny, and Murder by David Grann.
I can't believe you read this. This has been on my to-read stack for a while. He wrote Killers of the Flower Moon.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Basically, this is the story in the 1750s. This is all going to be about British murder.
Sorry. By the way, one more point before you go going. This was supposed to be Scorsese's next film, an adaptation of this book.
Oh my God, it'd be an amazing movie.
I think that's out the window now.
1750s, all of these are about British maritime. Everything I'm going to talk about today. Ship crashes. There's a great deal of hubris that takes place between the people, by the way that the ships are socially classed. They end up on a beach. It's sort of a story about the worst parts of human nature, but it's a very difficult thing to research, and I think the amount of work that was put into being able to tell this story by going back through any available documents and also having to sort through the subjective points of view that let you tell those stories was pretty fascinating. It doesn't really make you feel good at the end, but it does make you feel like, oh my God, how did people live through this? And I think that's one of the reasons I really like these kinds of stories. Then 1754, maybe not exactly right on the date, but at that point, they're sailing around the world, but they don't know anything. They don't know what scurvy is. They don't know why halfway through a given journey, their joints start to fall apart and they start bleeding and they're in horrible agony. They don't know why yet, but they keep doing it. This is one of the reasons that I read history, I think, so often, is that you want to know how people responded being in that world. People are no different now. They just had a different set of circumstances. And the way that people behaved on this it's a story of shipwreck, mutiny, and murder. So, that'll sort of tell you what you need to. But the sort of egos clashing and class society in Britain and in the Navy is pretty compelling.
As you can tell from our podcast choices and a lot of just the discussion of this, we enjoy entertainment, and entertainment has been born out of Hollywood, for better or for worse. And so when Hollywood, The Oral History by Janine Bessinger and Sam Wasson came out, I believe Connor last year for Christmas, we both got each other this book.
It was an O. Henry moment, yes.
Yeah, it's a real fantastic moment because it was right up both of our alley. And I feel like over the past couple of years, there has been a tome, 1,000-page-esque oral history book that completely kicked my ass. Last year it was the HBO book, Tinderbox. This year it was this Hollywood book that took me forever to get through, but I enjoyed the hell out of it as, it took a wonderful journey from, the 1920s all the way up to present day to hear from the people who made the movies that we love and their perspective on it. And it was just a joy to get lost in the Hollywood studio system of the 20s to the 50s, and then the rise of alternative or auteur cinema, in the 60s and 70s, and then leading into the, superpowered agents and blockbuster of the 80s and 90s. And then speculation as to where we'll go from there. I thought it was a blast to read, and love the oral history format, and the longer the better.
Yeah, it was interesting because it was all compiled from AFI interviews that they had collected over the years. So it wasn't like Janine Bessinger and Sam Wasson, the writers,
did these interviews.
They couldn't go and make cultivate themes. They only had what was available to them. So there's some glaring holes, but you're never going to have this again. Like, this starts, as Ron said, in the very beginning of Hollywood and goes to I think the 90s. or even does it go beyond that?
No, it goes later. It goes later than that.
And the only reason that is because the AFI collected all these interviews throughout the years. And so you get people talking about what it was like contemporaneously to come to Hollywood in their 20s, 30s, 40s and find jobs and stumble into a job and suddenly you're a cinematographer and suddenly you're a director. It must have been a wild time, but at the same time, there's like one page on Cary Grant because they just didn't have those interviews. So like, it's interesting to see where the holes were, but I thought it was fascinating.
Yeah, totally.
The only thing was after a while, I had to give up on the idea of keeping track who all the people were talking.
Oh, yeah. I just took the surfing approach of just ride the wave.
Right, because in the beginning, I kept flipping back to the table of contents. That's okay. That's the costume. Then I was like, I can't.
I had to do that with the HBO book after a certain point.
Then you get the names Then you're like, okay, I know who those people. In the beginning, I'm just like, okay, that's the fucking lighting director. I don't really know.
Yeah,
but it's a great history book.
There were cues in their comments, and what I thought was great was that the research that was done, and then the thematic grouping of the quotes to make it seem like a discussion that wasn't really a discussion around a topic. I thought it flowed really nicely. It's really well done.
Speaking of history, this year I read Rogues, True Stories of Grifters, Killers, Rebels, and Crooks by Patrick Radden Keefe, a writer that Josh and I both admire quite a bit.
Yes.
This is a collection of his New Yorker profiles.
Bit of an anthology.
It's an anthology, about 20, 25-page profiles on various people. They're not all bad people. It ends with his famous Anthony Bourdain profile. I guess he'd fall under the Rebels moniker, but, there's like El Chapo's lawyer and like people like that, or the most wanted arms dealer in the world. I couldn't put it down. It was so fascinating to dive into these different, sometimes unsavory people and have Keefe dive into what makes them tick. But some of them are heartbreaking. One of them was about the lawyer who goes around defending terrible people because no one else will defend them, and everyone deserves a day in court. And she defended the Boston marathon bomber and the woman who drove her kids into the lake, like people like that. And what does that do to someone who's not herself bad, but takes it all in and takes the abuse? It was really interesting, really great profiles. Some of them are funny, some of them are heartbreaking, some of them are interesting, some of them are exciting. One of them was about how El Chapo's constantly escaping. Like, it was just a really great overview of Patrick Radden Keefe's, interest in the seamier side of life. He did the whole book about the Sacklers, and he has that sort of dialed in, and he's very good at it.
He is an exceptional writer and researcher. I mean, I was about to say, I think he's my favorite history writer. And then I was like, Eric Larson is. And I think they actually have different aspects. I think Eric Larson's probably
totally a
better storyteller, but it's hard to argue with the sort of amount of information that Keefe can, I was going to say distill, but it's not like he holds a lot back.
I almost put in the podcast section one of his podcasts, and I remembered that I had to listen to that last year, not this year.
Good.
I'll tell you about that after the show.
I went back and I did.
This is not about English maritime.
It isn't. I'd forgotten about it in there. In fact, it's very much not about English maritime. I had finished Cavalier and Clay, and we talked about it at some point, and I was just so, to go back to something and have it be even better than you remember it. Oh, we did a book split on it. That was what it was. And afterwards, I was like, I need some more Chabon. I need something. And so I said, all right, I'm going to read this Yiddish Policeman's Union, a novel, which I believe was the book that he followed up.
It was, because I read it next and I couldn't make it through.
Cavalier and Clay. So, and I don't know that I would have at the time, but I can't think of another book like this. It is an alternate history of a world where, following World War II, there was no Jewish homeland. So Israel didn't happen, but none of the people wanted to take the Jews, refugees, which happened. But so they were placed in Alaska. And so what you have is this little area of Alaska that has been populated by Jewish people following World War II until, I'm trying to remember the time, somewhere between the 70s and 90s, I think. And you're with these cops, and there's, the one good cop trying to do the right thing before the partition happens, because they're going to kick everybody out. It's going to revert back to the U.S.
So was the land not technically part of the U.S.?
It is. It's a little like Hong Kong, I guess.
I see.
Is they're going to be, repatriated somewhere, go live. But they had their own sort of homeland. But instead of it being in Israel with all of that, it's in Alaska.
Interesting.
It reads a lot like if you were listening to New York City Cops, but there's a lot more Yiddish involved. All of the details, character details, the thing that he does is tiny character moments, I think, better than anything else. And I don't mean to minimize the rest of what he does in books, but he makes a character come alive by giving them details that you can immediately recognize in people or in yourself. And there was a lot of that. But also just this book was so fucking weird. It wasn't weird. Like, you could read it. I have no problem. But just as a concept, like, I missed the part in the beginning that kind of told me what it was. And I was like, wait a minute, did this happen? And so I went and I was like, oh, okay. Once I sort of got my grounding again, I can't tell you, like, I loved it. It's one of my favorite books, but I was incredibly impressed by it. And I really enjoyed it. People tend to read the same kind of things over and over again. And I read this and I was like, I've never read that before.
Right.
Really great.
In 2020, the legendary newsman Pete Hamill died. He was one of the towering giants of New York media. He ran the New York Daily News. He ran the Post. He had basically every job you can have in New York journalism, and he was one of the famous people along with Breslin at the time. And so when he died, he'd also been a novelist, and so in many of his obituaries that I read, they listed his books and they talked about him, and one of them caught my eye, and I ended up picking it up around 2020, not reading it until this year, called Forever, a novel by Pete Hamill. And it's a fantasy story about a young Irishman in, I believe it starts off in the 1600s, who through Irish mysticism ends up gaining immortality only if he never leaves the island of Manhattan.
Basically Cassidy.
And so he has to stay there through the history of New York. And so he's there,
Jesus.
pre-revolution. He's there through the revolution, the Civil War, and it goes all the way up until the 2000s. It was simultaneously an interesting fantasy story about this guy, and he has things that happen to him and characters, and there's conflict and things, but also it acts as a history of the city. And I find myself constantly going to Wikipedia, and many of the things he's involved with or the events that happen around him are real things that happen. He's there for when the city burns down. At one point, it was mostly a city made of wood buildings, and there's a fire. Opinions still differ whether it was intentionally set or not. That basically burned the entire city to the ground. It was allowed to be rebuilt in stone. Cholera, epidemics, war, this whole spy plot that he puts him in the middle of, which is a real thing. I ended up learning a hell of a lot about the city I was born in and didn't know about, and found it interesting. The last bit was a little frustrating. He skips what I was looking forward to, the most interesting part. Like, it goes from like the Civil War to suddenly it's like 1999. Whoa, you skipped a lot of things.
You missed all of Al Smith.
Yeah, what about the telephone? Did he find that interesting? I really liked learning about the city. And it was a good story, too. It's a revenge story, and it's a fantasy story. And if you don't know anything about New York or the history of it, it really does open your eyes into things. And it was a really good book about New York as well as about this character.
To continue the British maritime tradition, we're going to definitely stick with this for the rest of the time. I read Endurance, Shackleton's Incredible Voyage by Alfred Lansing. There's another book, but it's not on the list here. That also is part of that theme. Whereas The Wager was about how humans fall apart, Endurance was kind of the opposite. It's the best sort of version of that British, you all hang together and it's very tough and you get together and you respect the big man. I'm sure it's a bit of a legend, but it seems like, because the story is so well documented, that Shackleton, and I'm talking about this like this is a thing everybody knows, but in 1914, they were going to go overland across Antarctica, but the ship got trapped in ice and they were stuck out there for a year and a half or something like that. And they couldn't go anywhere. And the ship, the Endurance, got crushed. And this is all while World War I is going on, by the way. In fact, they were about to go and they said, is it okay? Should we go? And Churchill was like, no, go now, because otherwise you're not going to be able to. And we should do this. It's good for England. Turned out it would get quite overshadowed. They get stuck on the ice. Their boat gets crushed by ice pressure and they go through hell and they stick together. It's not like there's no clashing between people, but it's kind of incredible. And the story of how they tell it is that you can't believe that this would happen, but it is so well documented because so many of these guys kept journals. They kept notes. They can compare all these things to each other. It's a very specific timeline. You can tell the story about what happens on a given boat because 3 guys wrote about it. It was fascinating. It's one of those things you're like, well, why are people still talking about this? Maybe it was amazing at the time. Nope, it's amazing now. And, people have gone and they've tried to recreate this, using modern technology or using, contemporary technology from the time. And no one's been able to do what they did back then. The last bit, I think, is maybe the most fascinating thing. I don't even want to give it away because I know it's like a story and people know it. There was a documentary 20 years ago now. It was a PBS documentary, but it does not include the amount of detail and interesting stuff that is in this book. It's a great history book of an adventure tale.
It's interesting you say that about the documenting and keeping journals and stuff like that. And while it's a very different world between Shackleton and 1980s hardcore band, but I read a book, A Roadie's Tale, written by Civ, who is the singer of the aforementioned in the music section, Gorilla Biscuits. He actually, before Gorilla Biscuits were formed, he was just a local scenester kid in the New York hardcore scene, mostly built around the Lower East Side and CBGBs. And Youth of Today was like the big band of the time. And the summer of 1987, they toured and Civ went along as a roadie and took a meticulous journal throughout the entire summer. And here we are now, almost 40 years later. And he did a book, which basically chronologically told the story of that tour from New York to California and back of, a bunch of kids, 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old kids in a van playing hardcore punk shows throughout the country.
Which you did.
Yeah, which not nearly as much fame.
No, but you
as,
went in a van across the country and go, no.
I did, but they had a lot more crazy stuff happen to them than mine. Civ is a very good frontman. Gorilla Biscuits is one of the best hardcore bands ever, but he was 17 at the time, right? So he's a baby. And the book was written in a way that he recounted and told the stories of what happened to them, but with a lot of the perspective of someone who is now older and looking back on it with wisdom. And if you're into that kind of music, if you're into the idea of tour life and roading, or band life and the stuff that happens on the road and all that sort of stuff, it was just a fun read. Definitely would recommend it if you're in any of those Venn diagram of music and reading and that sort of thing. So Roadie's Tale by Civ.
Spare by Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex was the autobiography that hit like a bomb in the world of books and culture. I think everyone knows the story of Prince Harry's recent conflicts with his family and his wife. This book I found more interesting as a really interesting look at PTSD, because he's clearly been dealing with it almost his entire life. And I don't know how much of it been diagnosed or dealt with, but from the death of his mother when he was a young kid, to going to fight in the war and he was in combat, to dealing with the paparazzi that triggers the PTSD of his mother, to his family. He's been clearly dealing with this stuff his whole life. And when you get to the end of the book, you see there was no choice for him but to excise himself from the firm. And I thought it was really well done and fascinating. I thought it was a really good read. And I came away respecting him a lot more than I did previous. I didn't not respect him, but I didn't have strong feelings on him either way. But reading it, I felt like I really respected all the stuff he's gone through and how he has come out of it. None of those people are normal, but he's probably as normal as you're going to get in that family.
All right, so here's where this all comes from. Many years ago, following the release of the movie Master and Commander: Far Side of the World, a movie I enjoyed, I thought, there seems to be books about these. And what I did not know is that Patrick O'Brian wrote a great number of books about Jack Aubrey and Stephen Maturin. And these are stories of two men who are in the British Royal Navy in the Napoleonic era. So you're talking about 1800 to whenever the books end. There are 20 or 21 books and then one sort of unfinished one at the end. So I can't remember if the total is 21 or 22. I think it's 20 plus the unfinished one. I said, you know what? Let's revisit these quickly. And I'm through 8. Actually, I'm in the middle of book 8, The Ionian Mission.
You've read them before, though, right?
I read the first 3 before. And then I think at the time it was far too daunting. I was like, I'm never going to get through this. But it turns out that once you sort of really get the hang of it and keep going, it's a story about two friends over a very long period of history. And I think the thing that is the most appealing about it to me is that on the surface, you would think, these are just heroic stories of military deeds, in the great man version. And really what it is, they're incredibly human stories about two flawed individuals who are great friends over a long period of time. And I think that there's a lot of humanity that is invested in them that we would recognize that isn't often taught or talked about in history. And so, Jack has insecurities, whereas he's amazing on the sea. And he is brave, and he's...
That can't be true. No Englishman had insecurities back then.
Exactly. And then Stephen Maturin is the incredibly intelligent Irish Catalonian genius who just happens to be great friends with him, but he also has human frailties and weaknesses. And when I say that, like, every book has to have that, whatever. But I think what I recognize in here is things that are very human. It takes away from the heroic nature of the thing. And there's still heroicism that happens in there. It gets into, once you sort of understand the doings of the service that they're in and how things are organized and how people are allowed to interact with each other, how those systems work, then you can put it in a context that you can recognize when you see these people doing it. And it is just, it's like any series. It is made better by how long it is and how long it goes and how much time you get to spend with people. And I mean, I think that's the thing where we've talked about it with Game of Thrones. We talked about it with the Expanse series. We've talked about it with all sorts of things where the longer you get to spend with these characters, if those characters are well constructed and the writer has the foresight to be able to do it, it's incredibly satisfying. It is the most satisfying. We see this in comic books sometimes. In mainstream comics, a lot of times there's the absence of development, but in some of those like 60 issue series or something like that, you see it. And that's what there is a lot of here. It's an X factor that I think people don't, you go, it's about ships and fighting and whatever. And it's so much more that's going on there. It's incredibly compelling. And I really like the people. And also being 8 or so into this, Paul Bettany and Russell Crowe casting was perfect. They're so good. I don't know that they need to have made a bunch more, but if they did, it would have been fantastic. They could have kept making them like every 5 years so that they age at the same time. It would be wonderful. Now, I know why they won't, first of all, no one pay for it, but I love it. I've only gotten more into it as I've kept going. I'm on 8.
You reading this series as your middle-aged sort of, not crisis, but your middle-aged project. I like this for you. This is appropriate.
Yeah, it's incredibly entertaining. It's not hard to get through at all. Yeah, it's delightful.
All right. I don't know how to follow that, but I did get for Christmas last year as a present, I got a book called Marvelous Manhattan, Stories of the Restaurants, Bars, and Shops That Make the City Special, written by Reggie Nadelson, who is a crime novelist and also a journalist. And basically this book grabbed some of the columns that she had written for T, the New York Times style magazine, that are just basically little spotlights on the great locations of Manhattan in terms of, restaurants, bars, and shops. And it's, specifically, limited to Manhattan and covers everything from, Keen Steakhouse to Le Bernardin to Serendipity to the Film Forum to Village Vanguard, Il Buco, the Apollo, like all these just, kind of real institutions, and give Reggie Nadelson's, kind of unique perspective as a lifelong New Yorker. If you love New York City, Connor, you were born there.
Yep.
I grew up in the shadow of it, spent a lot of time there. It's a great kind of like celebratory of the things that have made New York City as amazing as it is and the people behind them too.
Yeah, I think I need to read that.
Definitely worth reading in that regard. Right up your alley.
Finally, in 2020, when the Tom Hanks film Greyhound came out, he did a lot of press. He was often asked about his favorite war books, and he invariably mentioned Night Soldiers, a novel by Alan Furst. Alan Furst has written a series of very famous spy war novels set in the Cold War. But this was his first, if not his first, it's his most famous, and this is one of the books that Tom mentioned. I call him Tom. I bought it in 2020, of course, sat on my my to-read stack is about 3 feet high, in all honesty. So it takes me a while to get through it.
Do you think you ever will get through it?
Some books have been there for over a decade, Ron, so you tell me.
So no.
That's not how we look at this, Ron.
It's a living, breathing organism. So anyway, I'd done a bunch of nonfiction. I wanted to do fiction. I pulled this off the shelf, expecting sort of a light, breezy Cold War, spy book. And instead I got this epic, I think it's like 500-page book that almost felt like a great American novel more than a spy novel about this Russian, well, he's not Russian. He's like from Bulgaria, or was part of the Soviet Union at the time. Guy who gets pulled into the KGB in the 30s, ends up being sent to the Spanish Civil War, which was sort of the rehearsal for World War II. Then through World War II and then post-war, Cold War, he ends up in Paris. We follow this guy through basically the entirety of the Soviets' operations pre, during, and post-war, where he ends up splitting off from the KGB and joining the other side. But amazing, great historical novel. There's a sequence in there that was so visceral that made me uncomfortable to read, and it's a combat sequence. Really well done, really amazing. I would have read more, but I just was so wiped out after reading it that I had to go back to something lighter and breezier after that. Much heavier than I was expecting, and I really, really liked it a lot. It was really incredible, Josh. You would love this book.
Okay.
You don't have to read it. I'm just telling you you'd love it.
I have 13 of these things left to go.
I didn't say you had to read it now. You've got to finish your Napoleonic Wars books.
And then I got those Churchill books. Those are just always hanging over me.
Oh, right. I forgot about those.
I didn't forget them. I look at them all the time.
I still have that Washington biography from 2003.
Never finished it.
So those are the books we wanted to talk about. But now in the final segment, as always, we do our regular weekly Pick of the Week comic show where Josh and I, and sometimes our buddy Ryan, and sometimes other friends, talk about the week's new comics. So we do a lot of comic talk. We like to end the show on just a brief rundown of some of our favorite comics. Again, disclaimer, there are many great comics. These are some of them. So let's talk, Josh. Let's quickly run down some of our favorite titles of the year.
It would be very difficult as a person who's talked about the comics that we have this year without mentioning Fantastic Four. Ryan North's taking over from Dan Slott, Fantastic Four run that, Connor and I both loved, and then taking it in a completely different direction, but that we also love. It's really been a fantastic sort of 1-2 punch. It's exactly what you'd want. Like when you really love a run and it ends, and then the next one comes along and you don't want somebody trying to imitate it. They do something else and it is also great. And this is after what I would say is, for me, a dearth of Fantastic Four books that I've really loved for most of my memory. A lot of the stuff that's fantastic, the great Fantastic Four runs, weren't really recent. It's been wonderful and thoughtful and smart and funny and really getting into the character family stuff wrapped in sort of one concept that is still going on, but also has a definitive ending. I don't want them to stop, but I don't know how you can keep up this pace.
I think the best book of the year, we talked about it a lot. It was Pick of the Week a lot in the show. It was The Human Target, Tom King and Greg Smallwood's 12-issue, out of continuity, noir story of the human target investigating his own murder The suspects are all members of the Justice League International, the celebrated Justice League series from the 1980s, featuring transcendent artwork from Greg Smallwood, just wonderful character studies of these comedic characters, but put into a darker, more noir story. It was mind-blowing how good that book was, and the fact that it ended made me sad, even though we all knew it would. Every bit of it was great. It was all single-issue stories of the investigation telling a larger narrative, and some of those single issues are among the best single issues I've ever read. It was that good, and Greg Smallwood is that much of a gigantic talent, and I hope he draws more and more comics and does not disappear like so many of the great talents seem to.
If you only had one of either of those people on that series, it would have been a great series. Like if you had Tom King writing it and telling that story that way, and they had another artist on it who was, competent, good, whatever, it would have been great. If somebody wrote a story that was pretty good, and you read it, and it was only the Greg Smallwood art, you'd be like, that was great. The two of them together is just, it's unfair.
Right.
I don't know if this is a left field pick, but I'm going to go with Immortal Sergeant. This is from Image. It is Joe Kelly and Ken Nimura. You may remember them from I Killed Giants, which was a very big book quite a while ago, which is, other than visually, because Ken Nimura, incredibly specific and unique style that you almost don't know how he gets away with it. It's incredibly spare. It's to almost be like, if you saw some of this on its own, you'd be like, this is not a professional comic book artist. But that is the thing about the comic book form and comic book storytelling. If you make it work, you make it work, and it doesn't matter, and there are no rules in that. First issue, I thought, I do not know what to make of this at all. Second issue, I'm not even sure if I had it. But a few in, I was like, oh, this is a really interesting and special thing. Again, I've said this on other things we talked about this. I don't know what this is. It's kind of a cop story. It's kind of a father-son story. But in the comic book form, it is something completely new and unique. Really one of the highlights of the year.
Mark Russell's been writing a lot of books lately, and they haven't all hit the mark with me, but Traveling to Mars, I think, is one of his better ones. It's the story of a man in the future in which all of our resources are being plundered, and we're desperate for more. Corporation sends this man dying of cancer on a ship to Mars so that he can claim it for the corporation, so that all of the resources that have been discovered via Mars rover can be claimed by the corporation. Almost the entirety of the, I believe it's 11-issue run, we still have one issue to go, took place just on the ship, on the journey, in this guy's head, looking back at his life. If you're at all familiar with Mark Russell, you know a lot of it's to do with American capitalism and religion, and all the things that sort of go into modern life and how that can grind people down, and all the mistakes he's made along the way, and regrets, and the hopes and the fears and the loves he's had. It's been a really wonderful series. And then to reach Mars in the last couple of issues and have that turn into a whole debacle in ways I will definitely not spoil. I can't wait for the final issue. And it's been a really terrific, and I don't say heartwarming, but one of those Mark Russell books that makes you laugh and think and cry and wonder about life in a way only he can do.
This is becoming a Marvel heavy list, I'm realizing, but there you are. The Amazing Spider-Man. I thought it was a pretty good run before this. I think that was the Nick Spencer book. But Zeb Wells comes on, and every issue then has become like this must-read romp venture, really. Every time I read an issue of Amazing Spider-Man, I think, this is what Amazing Spider-Man should be. And I don't know how to explain that, but Amazing Spider-Man has a very specific idea in my heart about what it should be like. And this book is like that. I really love how consistent it has been and sort of how long this run has gone on, and even concepts and themes in it that I don't necessarily like are still handled well and handled dramatically, and they make me want to keep reading it. You know, when you'd see Peter Parker Spider-Man or Web of Spider-Man or a book just called, Spider-Man, it's never the same as Amazing Spider-Man. Amazing Spider-Man has to be a thing, and this is that thing. I don't know if that made any sense, but I think if you're a comic book reader, you know. With Connor, can you back me up at all?
Yeah, we're the only people on the internet who like the book, but that's fine.
Really?
Yeah, everyone hates it. Batman, Superman, World's Finest is my favorite ongoing series. Mark Waid and mostly Dan Mora doing the DC universe in Mark Waid's little continuity bubble that is delightful. It's the DC universe that's been missing for at least a decade now. Every time I think they're running out of ideas, nope, we got a new crazy one, and we get lots of guest stars, and Dan Mora draws the hell out of it. It's wonderful. When he's not on the book and drawing Shazam and there's a guest artist, it's usually pretty good. It's solid. But really, it sings when it's Waid and Mora together. The character designs, the incredible action sequences. If I was in charge, I would make this the DC universe that we get in the rest of the books, because it's way more fun than all the dour business going on everywhere else.
All right, moving along, we're back to She-Hulk and the Sensational She-Hulk, which are two series, but are the same series. They have numbers. They have legacy numbering. They're going away. Rainbow Rowell has stepped up and owned this book and turned it into a longer running She-Hulk series than we have seen in the time. A completely unique book that still also feels very much like a modern version of this She-Hulk character, who is among a small contingent of people, I think, having a moment in comics if you like good comics. And I think that she has an incredible respect and love for the old John Byrne She-Hulk series, which sort of, cemented who that character was to a certain extent, but has been modernized and updated and brought to by a female perspective, which I don't know how good John Byrne was at having that perspective, but I don't know.
Probably not as good as Rainbow Rowell.
Probably not. I just think that she puts an incredible emotional intelligence into her characters. It's fun. It's silly, but there's also like action. The relationships are really, she's a YA writer first and foremost, much bigger in that than in comic books, which for comic book people is hard to understand. Again, every time an issue comes out is delightful. The fact that she gets to keep doing this book is great. And the art is always, it's a couple of folks, Andre Genelay being sort of the main one. The art's always perfect for it. The covers are great. Jen Bartel covers, we're not super kind to covers these days. So those covers are special.
Let's get back to the Fantastic Four and talk about Clobberin' Time. The miniseries came out earlier this year. Was it Steve Scroach?
It was. The Scroach.
The Scroach really killed it with this one. It was a wacky sort of, it wasn't multiversy, but it was a trip through, was it time or, I can't remember.
You put this on here. I didn't do my research.
The point is this. It was a wonderful team-up book where every issue, the Thing teamed up with a different character from Marvel to fight this time-hopping or dimension-hopping, whatever it was, bad guy. The art was out of this world.
Yes.
It was a little too body horror-y. There was one issue where the Thing's plate started falling off and he was all gooey underneath, and that really stuck with me. Great team-ups. Wolverine, Doctor Doom, characters like that. Terrific characterization of the Thing, Ben Grimm.
There was one story, but you could have read any issue.
Yeah.
On its own.
Really great. It's been a wonderful many years of Fantastic Four stuff, and the Clobberin' Time was just another great entry. It wasn't involved with the other book. It was totally on its own, in its own bubble. If you like the Thing, if you like Marvel, it really goes through a lot of Marvel stuff. It was a great book. There was that one where, who was lecturing in that issue? Was the Thing doing a TED Talk? Yeah, that was it. Really great miniseries.
I love how you're asking me questions 3.5 hours.
I don't know. I'm
thing.
also sick. I was told there'd be no math.
I'm looking at my list now, and I like all the books I put on it, but I do have the feeling like I'm leaving things out. But then I look and I say, no, these books are great. I don't know if it's my wild card, but it's my boom card, Wild's End, which comes from writer Dan Abnett and an artist whose name I don't remember from Boom Studios. This is the second miniseries, although I never read the first one and don't need to have.
Are you sure?
I read the first issue and then forgot about it and didn't read the rest of it.
I read the first one.
What we have here is cute little animals living in post-war rural Britain. And this story is pretty much War of the Worlds, where these creatures come down. The main characters come back from a fishing trip, like a commercial fishing trip, and they find out like everyone has been co-opted by these giant lantern-shaped aliens who hypnotize them into doing work for it. Oh, Christ, it's a British maritime story.
Jesus, Josh.
Hey,
could you be more New England?
It's time. To be honest, that is literally my ancestry. I mean, like, I'm not even kidding. Like, my mom's side of the family, that's where they come from.
It's in your DNA.
British maritime people. I've never wanted to go to sea or be on a boat in any way, though. It's really charming characters. They're British country folk, and they're written that way. The sort of the dialogue, which is when they sound like themselves in the writing. Oh my God, that's how tired I'm getting. Their accents is written as you read them. You know what I'm talking about? Like, most people don't do it great, but it's really lovely.
You mean phonetic dialogue?
Yeah, it's authentic, but also a little bit like, movie of the weeky. And it works really well.
It's a little like Bert.
Yeah.
From Mary Poppins.
Well, no, that's a terrible accent, isn't it? There's a little story going on where they think that the older dad is, sort of losing his marbles a little bit, and the son or the grandson, and where it all fits. And so, there's two things going on. There's the big drama and the small drama. And it's beautiful and it's fun. And every time one of them comes out, I get excited. That's the best mark of a comic book to me, and a person who reads way too many comic books.
I did not plan it this way, but finally we're going to talk about Giant Days, also from Boom Studios. I didn't know where Wild's End was from. I didn't mean it to be this way. Giant Days was originally a webcomic in 2011, and then it was a comic in 2015, 2019, but I didn't read it till this year when it came out in these wonderful library edition hardcovers. I'd heard a lot about it, but just hadn't had an excuse or chance to read it till now. There are 7 volumes. I'm through 5 of them right now, and it's about these 3 girls in college in England. It's a slightly exaggerated, elevated slice of life. It's more comedic, slightly more cartoony, but it's basically a slice of life series about college. And it's been wonderful. It's been funny. It's been heartwarming. It's like college. It's a mess. Relationships, they break up, they get back together, they cheat. all kinds of things, all the things that happen when you're 20, 19, living on your own for the first time, trying to figure out life. The cartooning is wonderful. Josh, do you remember that series, the British Bake Off?
Yes.
That's the team behind Giant Days.
Oh, no kidding. Why have you never mentioned this on a show I've been on?
This book?
Yeah.
I'm mentioning this for the first time ever here.
Can you do that on the year-end wrap-up?
Yeah, I've read it in hardcovers. I'm reading it in hardcovers.
Fair enough. That's fair.
It's really made me miss college. I would maybe pull out.
I don't think it's hard to make you miss college.
No, I pulled out the photo albums for the first time in years after I got through a couple of these, and it just really does a great job, even if it's slightly more comedic, slightly more craziness that goes on than would in real life. But it really captures that feeling of being that age and trying to be on your own and trying to act like an adult, but you're really not kind of an adult, and going through all the trials and tribulations of friendship and love and all that stuff. And I've really been enjoying it. I don't want it to end, but I'm flying through the books because I can't put them down. I have read an entire hardcover in an evening because I just can't put it down. But I've been trying to portion out these last couple because I don't want it to be over. But it's a terrific comedic slice of life book. Giant Days from Boombox and Boom Studios. So there you go. Those are some of our favorite comics from the year. And those are our films, TV shows, music, books, podcasts, and comics that we enjoyed this year.
Ron, are you still with us?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I'm enjoying that you guys enjoy Amazing Spider-Man because Connor is right. Everybody else hates it.
That's so weird. I mean,
yeah.
You know what? It isn't because things I like.
Weird year. That's for sure.
So let's plug some things. Let's talk about some other shows to do. Ron, we want to talk about your shows?
Longtime listeners know that I also did a podcast called All About Android that was about the Android operating system and mobile phones, stuff like that. Well, that show ended this past summer, ended at the end of June. Then 2 weeks later, we started up a new show called Android Faithful. You can go to androidfaithful.com where you can subscribe and support it on Patreon and do all that fun stuff. Take a listen. We live stream every Tuesday out to YouTube and to Twitch every Tuesday night at 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern. And then we also release the podcast on Tuesday evenings. And it's myself, my brother-in-arm, Jason Howell, and Wintut Dow, and Michelle Rahman, with a myriad of guests that come on to talk about the world of Android. So if you're into that sort of stuff, definitely check out androidfaithful.com. We appreciate the Venn diagram between iFanboy and Android Faithful. I know there's a few of you out there, and I love you for it. So thank you very much. And then also, I know earlier at the very beginning of this marathon podcast, I talked about the Pinball movie. Definitely go check it out. But if you like pinball, check out Scorbit. We got a mobile app on iOS and on Android where it helps you keep track of your pinball scores. And yeah, fun stuff and more exciting stuff coming from Scorbit in 2024. So check it all out at scorbit.io.
Does Scorbit have like a global leaderboard?
We're working on that. There is a global leaderboard in the app on the games level, so you can see who has the highest score on an individual game. You don't do kind of global leaderboard like the number one player or anything like that, just because the games are too different, so it's not really fair. You would
have to do it by the specific game, and there's too many.
Right, exactly, yeah.
Are you on any of those leaderboards?
No, I'm not.
Well, it's all gambling anyway. It's all
no, it's not.
They should have put those out when they got rid of the liquor. They should have taken those and the Hooskows.
No dancing, no pinball, no liquor. Why have any fun in life? It's hard enough as it is.
It was a tough time in the 30s, that's for sure.
This is our final show of the year. We take a couple weeks off for the holidays, spend time with our families, relax, recharge our brains. You can hear Josh and I desperately need that. But if you find yourself needing shows, listen, if you're having your family over for like a holiday dinner and it's getting tense, why don't you slap on a Media Explode? We did a year-end mailbag. That was our most recent one. We answered some bunch of email questions that were super fun. We always enjoyed the mailbag. We also had a special edition review of the Marvels. These are just our most recent shows. We did a Booksplode review of the first 4 volumes of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the first 12 issues of the original series. And Josh talked to comic book writer Sina Grace in the Talksplode. Those are our most recent shows. Any of those will work for a tense holiday family dinner. Just throw it on in the background instead of music. People will definitely appreciate it. And if you do, please let us know. We'll be returning with our Pick of the Week show, number 909, on the 7th of January, 2024, which is a number that shouldn't be real. But it is. Apparently, we're still alive.
I remember getting a credit card when I got out of college, and it said, this expires in 2004. And I thought, that's an insane number. But now it was 19 years ago. I think of that all the time.
So if you need something to listen to, there's all those. You can always go back and listen to our old shows, but it's always nice to hear some of our most recent stuff. We appreciate everyone who listens throughout the year. So now, where can you find all those shows? You can find our library, which at this point is over 1,300 shows over at iFanboy.com or wherever podcasts are sold. They're all up on the feed. You can find them there. You can follow us at iFanboy Comics on Instagram to find out what the pick of the week is before the show comes out on a regular week. And we'll sometimes do the best of the week in panels on there as well. Those are all there. Individually, we are CS Kilpatrick on Instagram, J.A. Flanagan on Instagram, Ron XO on Instagram, and I assume X and Threads as well.
Correct.
I've seen you on Threads.
Yeah, I've been on Threads. Yep.
I've seen your post on those little threads, things they try to get you to click on when you're on Instagram.
No, they didn't give me those. They don't know I like him.
I say I know that guy. So yeah, check that out.
That credit card I was referring to, by the way, it had Spider-Man on it. And I was so proud at that point that I had a credit card with
Did you ever pay it
Spider-Man.
off, or you still owe money on it?
We worked out something. Turns out that interest will compound. I mean, you really have no idea how quickly you can just be sent into ruin. I was a master balance transfer. That's what I was. I avoided interest at all costs. Still can. That's where I live. You can subscribe to youtube.com/iFanboy. There are buttons, I understand, under the videos.
What do those buttons do? Ron, you must know.
They can be smashed.
What does the bell do? Wait, don't tell me. I don't want to have the mystery.
Okay. All right.
I don't want to have
Subscribe
the
to our
mystery
YouTube page. You can get any of the audio shows we do. We put them up on there too, if that is a way that you like to listen to things. I believe if you subscribe to the YouTube service or whatever it is at an exorbitant fee, then you can just listen to those things offline like you would anything else. But also our old video shows and everything that we did. Our body of work lives there. Visual body of work for when they are viewers and not just listeners. It is good if you like those, by the way, and engage with them. That's good for us. You could write a review for this podcast. You could leave a star rating on one of the many podcasting applications and locations, your Apple Podcast, Spotify, Audible, Amazon, many.
Ron, where are you listening to podcasts?
Pocket Casts.
Pocket Casts. There you go.
Awesome app.
Is it better than Overcast?
Yes.
Okay.
Overcast is iOS only.
Oh, I didn't know I was getting into an internecine struggle.
No, I mean, it's just what it is.
Fair enough.
Ron is Pocket Cast approved. Or the other way around. I don't know what's happening anymore. My brain is leaking out of my ears. Thanks for listening this year to any show. This one, if this is the only one you listen to, if you listen to every show or some of the shows or one of the shows or just the shows Ron was on, thanks for listening. We appreciate every listener.
What year is this? So it's 2005 we started. So this is what, our 18th year?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. So thank you for 18 years.
You're obviously not on the show that often because Connor and I can't let that number go.
Yeah, I try to. Well, even I try to ignore it. 18 years.
The show could go to war.
It's a very long time, but thank you to everybody.
The show could go to maritime war.
Well, no, you could go to war at a much earlier age than the Napoleonic
I
era.
know, back then it was like 12. Go there, you're
younger
swapping
than
the
that.
decks.
We could have a Lob Lolly Boy on there who was 4 years old. There's a whole lot of stuff going on. Yeah, I just said Lob Lolly Boy, like anyone would know, but that's a real thing. Like someone wouldn't check me on that, be like, "Oh, it's true." I would say that normally on this show we sound healthier.
Yes, that's true. We should
But as I started to think about saying it, I thought that's not necessarily true. Like if we're looking at percentages, is it true? I don't know.
So thanks for listening to this show. Thanks for listening all year long. We appreciate you. And until next year, I'm Connor.
I'm Ron.
I'm Josh.